Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting for May 22nd, 2018. Item 8.1 is the IPA year-end report. And I believe our Independent Police Auditor is here. He'll be making a presentation. I see Siobhan. Is Aaron also here? Yes. Oh, good. I was worried we were short one Independent Police Auditor. Oh, there he is. Great. Good. You only have 6 in the office, so it's important to hang on to all of them. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks. Sorry if I missed the first call there.
No worries.
So, yeah, hi, Mr. Mayor, council members. Thanks for having us tonight. My name's Aaron Zisser. I'm the Independent Police Auditor for San Jose, and we're here to present our annual year-end report for the year 2017. And we'll just jump right into it. I want to just first acknowledge there was a lot of people from a lot of different places contributed substantially to the report, which you have available to you. It's a lengthy report. I want to first acknowledge the staff, the entire staff of 6 contributed mightily to this effort. We have 3 here in addition to myself tonight. Siobhan Nuri, the assistant IPA, is seated next to me, and Aaron O'Neill and Talina Barrientos, 2 of our analysts, are also here in attendance, and I appreciate their support and their contributions. We also received a lot of information, a lot of data, and a lot of opportunities to discuss with SJPD, in particular Chief Garcia, Assistant Chief Knopf, and Lieutenant Matchett, the Internal Affairs Commander, and I know they're here, and I have appreciated that engagement. And frankly, a lot of the discussions I've had with City Council and the City Manager and the Mayor and their staff have been extremely helpful as we put together our thoughts for this report. And finally, we have an advisory council that we meet with regularly and who provide input, and we meet routinely with community groups and community members on a range of issues, and we benefit greatly from all those conversations. I didn't mention 2 of our other staff who are not here, Vivian Doe and Jessica Flores, who provided lots and lots of support for the report. I also want to acknowledge Councilmember Nguyen. We're very, very grateful for the cover photo for our report. We discovered the photo and had to figure out who to ask to be able to use it, and we discovered that it was the council member. And it's a beautiful photo, and we were thrilled to discover that. So thank you for letting us use that, and for the great work taking that beautiful shot. The presentation, we're going to go through a few different topics. I'm going to discuss just briefly the new structure of the report. Again, very briefly summarize my approach to the work. This is my first annual report as IPA. I started in October, so I try to lay that out in the report a little bit. Our community engagement work, our process for auditing citizen complaints, along with an overview of those statistics. And then, as I'll explain, we break the report down into different substantive sections, and I'll highlight a few of those. So first, just as a matter of a little bit of guidance, we, in addition to addressing our auditing process and the complaint statistics, we break the report down into 10 substantive topics. We discuss each of those in turn. This is a little bit different. This is quite different from previous year's reports. You can see the various topics there. I've bolded the topics that I'll cover in this presentation, and the rest, of course, I'm happy to answer questions about, but you can find the discussion in the report. Each topic, each chapter includes relevant policy recommendations, case summaries, and statistics related to the topic. There are a couple things that this facilitates, the structure facilitates. One, different people in the community are going to be interested in different topics, and this is a way for people to engage on the issues that they're most interested in. And we are, thanks in large measure to the mayor's very diligent staff, in the process of putting up a website dedicated to the report that will, again, be broken down by topic and easier for the public to engage with. As I mentioned, the first chapter of the report it's called a letter from the IPA. It's to the community, and it lays out my approach as the new IPA here. And I wanted to cover a few of those points. First, I discuss there's this cliche in the world of oversight that civilian oversight is about transparency and accountability, and that's true, but I had felt like maybe that cliche had lost its meaning. And what that transparency and accountability is really for is it's a vehicle for change where change is needed. And so I discuss how transparency and accountability are means to that end. I then discuss what I refer to as the arm's length collaboration approach to oversight. I just think a huge part of my job, maybe the primary part of my job, is to ask lots of questions of everybody, the police, the community, to listen closely, and then to advocate on areas where there could be improvement in policies and practices. And finally, I discuss some of the changes that I have made at the IPA. Nothing, earth-shattering, but a few changes that sort of ensure that we utilize our full, all the tools in our tool belt. And so I talk about taking a stricter approach to the appeals process, where we appeal disagreements with internal affairs each time there's a disagreement to the chief, and then, if necessary, to the city manager. I discuss my prioritization of officer-involved shootings in terms of our authority to respond to the scene and receive an in-person briefing from the internal affairs commander, which I've done in each instance. And we also discussed the change in the report structure and some changes in how we conduct our outreach, which brings us to the summary of our community engagement and outreach work. We use lots of different methods for our outreach. I won't get into them, but I mentioned Talina Barrientos from our office, who's here tonight. She's also our outreach coordinator, but a lot of us in the office do quite a lot of outreach and engagement. What I really want to discuss quickly are the three purposes, as I see them, of outreach. And the first is to educate the community about our complaint process and other ways that they might utilize our office. Secondly, and even more important, to listen to the community members that we speak with so that their experiences, their observations, their concerns can inform our policy recommendations. And then finally, to build trust and relationships with members in our community so that we can support one another's efforts and reinforce each other and educate each other. And really, I see this, I've heard over and over again from members of the community that one thing we really need to make sure and do is ensure that there's a feedback loop, that when we hear from the community, we circle back on a regular basis and in different ways so that we touch base about how we've used the information we've received. So next, I want to just quickly discuss our auditing process and our statistics on complaints. You'll see that our complaints are down over the last several years, and particularly since last year, from 292 complaints received to 222 in 2017. There's an even more dramatic, in terms of percentages, drop in forced complaints. I think it's always important to emphasize that it's very hard to draw conclusions from this kind of data. One factor may just be that the community, we need to be out there in the community letting people know about who we are and that we are available. And so it may be a reflection in large part about how much people know about us. And of course, we'll see whether this trend continues. I titled this Intake and Classification. I just want to touch on classification quickly. What that means is how we categorize allegations, or when we receive a complaint, if it alleges force, do we categorize it as force? Do we categorize it as procedure? And so on. We do discuss in more detail in the report one particular set of allegations, and that is whether police are responsive to calls for service and reported crimes. This is referred to as neglect of duty, and we discuss this in detail. I just wanted to mention it. We have some case summaries that sort of illustrate these types of cases, and we have a policy recommendation about refining the classification process in terms of properly using that designation. Next, just a quick chart there about how many officers receive multiple complaints, 2, 3, 4, and 5 complaints for your consideration. I don't have any commentary on that, but I thought it was worth reflecting there. Next, in terms of just the last slide on our process and statistics for complaints, are discipline outcomes. So you see there that discipline went up from 2016, but that's just a reflection of the fact that there were more sustained findings of misconduct. And in fact, the stat there on the right indicates that we had a comparatively high, what we call a sustained rate, the percentage of complaints that include at least one allegation that resulted in a finding of misconduct. And it's as I said, comparatively high, and up from 11% to 16% since 2016. So just quickly, some of the sustained cases included 4 sustained search and seizure allegations, 2 sustained bias-based policing allegations, and 7 sustained courtesy allegations. There were 2, as you see in the chart there, 2 suspensions resulting from citizen complaints. I know the chief is going to talk about department-initiated investigations, which are separate from citizen complaints. Our office only reviews the investigation of citizen complaints, not internally initiated investigations by the department. The last thing to mention about this is that we are theorizing that the fact that body-worn cameras are now fully operational in the department, that might be affecting the sustained rate. It's just easier to tell exactly what happened in many cases because of this very clear body-worn camera footage, often from multiple angles, because multiple officers are often involved in these cases. And we know that it makes our job easier and internal affairs' job easier as well. So now getting into the substantive chapters, the first being use of force. And the first thing to say about use of force is that the department deserves a great deal of credit for rolling out this public-facing dashboard on use of force, which is up on their website and available for the public to sort of tool around with and run different sort of queries. There was an associated report issued by the group that put together the analysis and the dashboard called Police Strategies. They have a report out that's also available on the SJPD website. And we just here on this slide lay out some of the findings that they document in their report. Overall rates of force compared to other jurisdictions that Police Strategies LLC has studied, the injury rates compared to other jurisdictions, and the kinds of weapons that are used. But it's important to note that there are some pretty important limitations in terms of the data. The first one up there is that the analysis only reports on what are called reportable uses of force. So it draws from the officer's own reports. Not every use of force is actually reportable or reported by an officer. There are exceptions to when force needs to be reported. And this can vary by jurisdiction. So it's not always easy to, you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples when you're comparing to other jurisdictions. And secondly, this is not an exhaustive list, but the other thing that had jumped out at us was that this analysis does rely on officers' own narratives, and that's particularly important when you're looking at the threat level of the subject or the resistance level of the subject, that's based on the officer's own perceptions and their descriptions of their perceptions. That doesn't mean this tool isn't useful. It's extremely useful, and it's unusual for a department to do this, and I don't want to understate its significance, but it's important that the public and this body be aware of some of the limitations. Separate from that report by Police Strategies LLC, there's this dashboard, which draws from that data, but there are some additional limitations associated with a public-facing dashboard, which means that any of the conclusions one were to draw from the dashboard data really have to be preliminary, and we indicate this in our report, that is preliminary data. The dashboard, for example, doesn't report on all contacts, so the only incidents when force was used are included in the data, and reportable force. It's aggregated data. Obviously, they're not going to open up the underlying records to the public, but certainly we also lack the access to sort of dig deeper into underlying records. And then the dashboard is composed of 3 separate dashboards, and there's some good reasons to separate out the dashboards, but it does mean you're limited in terms of what you can do on each of those 3 dashboards. So for example, you can look at demographics along crime and the resistance level, but you can't break down injuries or weapons by demographics, race, gender, age, etc. But we think that the dashboard is helpful to flag areas for further discussion and exploration, and we'll continue to do that and engage with the department, and certainly appreciate that that's available to us and to the public. Moving on use of force, we have some case summaries. We do not include case summaries of actual uses of force. There were no sustained findings on use of force per se, but there were sustained findings related to how uses of force were either reported or documented or reviewed by a supervisor when they were required to be reviewed. And so we have a few examples here. The first one is about the failure by a supervisor to review a use of force by a subordinate. The second is the failure by an officer to report his force to his own supervisor to make sure that that force got reviewed. And then the third is failure to properly report the display of the taser during an arrest. Those were all sustained cases regarding reporting. And I should credit internal affairs here, because citizens will not be complaining that there was poor documentation or reporting. These are allegations that internal affairs identifies in the course of their investigation of other allegations, and they include those as part of their investigation. There's a new policy, also really important development at SJPD, a new policy as of October that requires commanders to review the most serious uses of force and to ensure that uses of force receive proper review. And we speculate that the new policy should help address some of these reporting and review issues. Officer-involved shootings, obviously an issue that captures a great deal of attention in the community. And this slide is just meant to depict the different responses that happen after an officer-involved shooting. Criminal investigation by the DA's office and SJPD, that's a joint investigation where there's been an injury or a death. An IA investigation in every case of an officer-involved shooting. I should say there's a criminal investigation for any officer-involved shooting, but it's not joint with the DA unless there's an injury or a death. And then a policy review to look at whether there are policy equipment or training needs, separate from any discipline questions. And then various transparency tools, including the DA issues detailed reports after any fatal officer-involved shooting that they investigate. We can review the IA investigation, the internal affairs investigation of an officer-involved shooting, If we receive a citizen complaint about the shooting, that's obviously key. But at a minimum, we are authorized, as I mentioned, to respond to the scene and receive a briefing. I mentioned the policy review within 90 days of any officer-involved shooting. There's what's called a shooting review panel, and we do participate in that panel and receive all the associated documentation and video. And then the last thing I want to mention on this is that there is another transparency tool, which I mentioned in the report, which is that SJPD and their policy manual is required to issue annual reports to the City Council and the Mayor. These are public reports summarizing that year's shooting review panel discussions and the recommendations that come out of those discussions. And unfortunately, we were disappointed to learn that those memos have not been issued each year since it was required in 2015. I have every confidence that the chief's stated commitment to begin issuing those reports is true. I have no reason not to believe that, and he has committed to doing that, and I appreciate that. The number of officer-involved shootings was up in 2017 compared to 2016. We, with the help of information provided by SJPD, document various demographics and other statistics associated with these. I do just want to quickly mention that we received just today, and it's part of the record now for this discussion, a document from Silicon Valley Debug and the families who have been affected by officer-involved shootings. And I would just commend everyone's attention to that very brief, very succinct document that highlights some of the issues that Debug and those families are most interested in terms of our report and other additional recommendations that group has, particularly as they relate to officer-involved shootings and other force issues. I appreciated the document and their suggestions. One of the statistics we highlight is the fact that 3/4 of the officer-involved shootings in 2017 involved individuals with a history of mental health needs. You know, this is just an issue we continue to engage with these families and others about. Obviously, has a huge impact on those families and the broader community. This brings us right to our chapter on how the police department ensures that officers receive training and interact appropriately with members of the community who have are experiencing a mental health crisis or have mental health needs. And so we lay out some of the statistics on how many calls for service require a CIT, that is a crisis intervention trained officer, the progress SJPD is making on training its officers in crisis intervention. And then we do discuss a previous recommendation we had a couple years or last year, recommending that the department implement a data collection program to track the effectiveness of their CIT program. SJPD reports that it's still studying ways to evaluate its program's effectiveness, and we just encourage them to find a program sooner rather than later to begin tracking that kind of important information. We have a policy recommendation in the section of the report on requiring officers to undergo refresher training in CIT, and we also publish SJPD's response. This is a really important issue, and we have 3 of our 10 policy recommendations relate to the mental health population. We've met with the CIT unit. We requested data from SJPD. We've conducted outreach to mental health providers and others. Other issues, of course, related to this population include other uses of force, not just shootings. Bias-based policing, one of the 2 sustained bias-based policing cases this year involved mental health disability. And then courtesy allegations are something we see a lot of involving individuals with mental health concerns. One of the other issues we wanted to highlight was the phenomenon of what are called 5150 mental health holds, where an officer is authorized to place a person on a 72-hour hold for mental health evaluation if they pose a danger to themselves or others or are gravely disabled as a result of a mental health disorder. We receive complaints about both officers' failure to impose a 5150 hold and about officers' alleged overuse of the 5150 hold process. And we have a recommendation about where certain individuals who are being placed on a 5150 hold ought to be transported, whether they should be taken to jail or emergency psychiatric services. And we recommend to the department that where the only crime the individual has committed is resisting arrest for being taken on that 5150 hold, they don't want to be taken and they resist being placed on the hold, that should not form a basis for transporting the individual to jail, and that SJPD should use its discretion in even deciding whether to cite or arrest the individual for resisting arrest. We also visited emergency psychiatric services and had a lengthy discussion with a manager there to learn as much as we could about this issue. Next topic is equal treatment based on race. We document some case summaries, including one where IA didn't sustain the case. They found that the allegation was unfounded, but where our office disagreed. An officer made reference to Black Lives Matter and made a comment that the complainant perceived as being based on a stereotype about the fact that the complainant had a job, and we pushed back on IA's analysis. In another case where there was a sustained finding of bias-based policing, that case involved an officer using language that referred to various stereotypes about Asians. And there were other sort of troubling circumstances involved in that case that we summarized there. I probably should have titled this Equal Treatment Based on Race and Language Access, because we do cover language access, or the right of individuals to have translation services when they interact with officers. But in the chapter on equal treatment, we discuss training that officers receive, the number of complaints, it was interesting to note that while complaints overall have gone down, bias-based policing complaints have really stayed about the same in the last 5 years or so. I mentioned there were 2 sustained bias-based policing cases, and we have a policy recommendation on language access, incorporating the language access plan into the SJPD duty manual. And SJPD has published and provided its response to all of our policy recommendations, and we publish their responses in our report. We also address equal treatment based on sex, and I'm going to focus here on domestic violence and how the police respond to domestic violence. We have a number of different statistics. You can click over there. That I won't go through in detail. You can read them yourselves. But suffice it to say that there are a lot of domestic violence calls, and we did look at whether SJPD has enough resources and staffing to address the many thousands of cases they deal with every year. I credit this body, the City Council, for having a couple really substantive discussions recently on this issue, and a lot of the information we publish in our report comes from the study session that the City Council conducted and the report that SJPD provided ahead of that study session. But we also met with 3 commanders responsible for this area of the operations of SJPD and sat down with them for quite some time to go through the data and the various questions we had. We have case summaries in our report about that are examples of how officers respond, or how complainants express concerns about how officers respond to domestic violence calls. And we have a recommendation, separate from domestic violence, we have a recommendation about how SJPD should receive complaints about sexual assaults, and how SJPD should handle those complaints through a trauma-informed process. Next, so that sort of, those are the highlights in terms of some of the substantive topics, but one of the we have a chapter devoted to our engagement with internal affairs and how internal affairs does in terms of their investigations into complaints. Our job is to ensure that IA conducts a fair, thorough, objective, and complete investigation. And so we review the vast majority of IA's investigations of complaints. We are required to review 100% of force complaints and 25% of the other complaints, but we review total upwards of 85-90% of all complaints, including all force complaints. And if we have concerns about the quality of the IA investigation, either the analysis or the investigation, we can send what are called a concerns memo to Internal Affairs, or we can agree. If we still don't, if we can't resolve those concerns, we appeal to the chief. And if we can't resolve it with the chief, we appeal to the city manager. If we resolve it either through our concerns process or appeal, we'll do what's called agree after further. And if we can't resolve it through any of that, we'll disagree. I mentioned that I plan to use this process in a very strict fashion. Anytime we disagree, we'll take it up the chain. In 2017, the furthest it went was to the chief, and only a handful of times. In 2017, we agreed 83% of the time without any concerns. So the first effort by IA, we agreed 83% of the time. For force complaints, that rate is 73%. And you can see there how that compares to previous years. There are various reasons why we might have concerns, and we enumerate some of them. Here's the first three relate to investigation, whether they identify all the subject officers or interview all the officers and ask the necessary questions, whether they identify all the allegations that have been made. And then the number 4 and 5 are about analysis by IA, whether they apply the correct policy and apply the correct standard of proof. Those are some of the examples. In some cases where we've had concerns or appealed, the result of those concerns or appeals have been additional sustained findings. So this does result in additional findings in a small number of cases, and you can see some of the examples there. But even when they don't result in sustained findings, that's not why we're issuing concerns to have more sustained findings. What we're really seeking is a complete record or a clear rationale by Internal Affairs, and that may still result in an exonerated or unfounded outcome that's justified, but now we can be reassured that that's a justified outcome. We have a policy recommendation about the standard of proof, and again, we publish SJPD's response. That concludes my presentation, and I don't know exactly what the structure is. I'm happy to answer questions now or after the chief's presentation, but certainly I look forward to your questions and hearing from the public.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Why don't we take the chief's presentation, and then we'll hear from the public, and then we'll have questions of anyone. So, Chief, would you like to proceed?
Thank you, Mayor. Just for process, Mayor, I'm going to go my response to the presentation and then go directly into DIIs.
Okay.
As well.
Sure.
Just to get
I'm not sure if you know, the memorandum that I had submitted is actually going to be heard, I think, at Rules on Wednesday, so I didn't want you thinking you had to respond to that memo.
Okay, no, thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
I just wanted to get it, do our DIIs.
Oh, the standard DII report. I got
Yes.
it. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, Mayor and Council. I want to set a little bit of context and perspective on the Police Department's response to this year's audit from the Independent Police Auditor. This year, some of our response will be more of a rebuttal, so some of that context is essential. This report has historically been a valuable tool in improving the way we deliver police service in San Jose. It offers transparency and undoubtedly has made us a better organization. While we don't always agree with the recommendations from the IPA's office, the vast majority of recommendations have been and continue to be implemented by this police department. Some items will come up in an audit that requires the additional technical explanation from the subject matter experts. And additionally, achieving improvements in the police department requires insight on whether getting to the stated goal is better suited by additional training rather than new policy. The goal of this audit is not to implement every recommendation as written, but to improve what we will always be improving on in this police department. Maintaining a high standard of conduct in our officers is now arguably more important than ever as we undergo an unprecedented amount of growth in our police department. We've watched other police departments in the country fail in holding themselves to that high standard under the enormous pressure of growing the ranks and responding to the need for putting more officers on the streets. Before we dive into the report, with regards to statistics, we're going to have some disagreements what they mean, but hopefully not on two of them. This year's report shows complaints on San Jose officers continuing to go down and accountability through discipline going up. As a chief leading the most thinly staffed police agency of any major city in America, in some of the most challenging times for police in our country, I could not be more proud of every man and woman that puts on this uniform. This community should be equally proud. What should be the overall takeaway from a police oversight report showing increased accountability and fewer complaints is that our system is working. We are one of only 2 police agencies in the county with police oversight, and our system continues to work because of the history of fairness to all involved. With regards to the officer-involved shootings, to the families of those that have lost loved ones, these incidents are tragic, and they're tragedies for all of us. We are united in working in every way possible to reduce those tragedies. This will continue to be an area we work hardest on. So now, let me take it to start with the report and some of the issues that we have with it. In the executive summary, the IPA speaks about complaints regarding force are down dramatically, though much of this decline may track the overall decline in use of force during the same general period of time. Well, we find this not to be true. There's not an overall decline in use of force. In fact, in 2016, there were 639 use of force incidents and 60 use of force complaints. In 2017, there were 629 use of force incidents and 33 use of force complaints. Force is remaining stable, but complaints are decreasing. This decline can be attributed to our officers using force appropriately and justifiably, increased supervision on force incidents, and body-worn cameras. And as the IPA stated earlier, when he made that the reason we're sustaining higher cases is because of body-worn cameras, I'll offer that one of the reasons that our force is diminishing is because of everything that's been mentioned, body-worn cameras, as they help improve our behavior as well as the individuals that we're contacting. In that executive summary again, the IPA talks that the data on racial disparities and uses of force is mixed, though force is used on African Americans and Latinos at an overall higher rate than on whites as compared to the demographic representations in San Jose. Police strategies and the University of Texas El Paso both state demographics is not an appropriate benchmark. When we compare force to arrest rates, the different races are separated less than 1%, i.e. no racial disparity in the way we use force on different races when they're arrested. When we speak about, in that same area, crisis intervention interactions, that the IPA conducted substantial outreach to learn about various ways that local agencies address the needs of individuals with psychiatric disabilities who become involved with SJPD. The need for attention to this set of issues was highlighted by the comparatively high number of officer-involved shootings in 2017 that involved individuals with a history of mental health needs. We encountered each case involving allegations of excessive force, improper use of involuntary mental health holds, rude conduct, and bias-based policing. With regards to the improper use of involuntary mental health holds that he states that they encountered cases, there were only 2 internal affairs cases when our officers responded to over 4,182 calls for service involving the need for CIT, which equals to 0.05% of the call that they responded to the mentally ill. On Chapter 5, when the IPA speaks that the data derives entirely from officers' reports describing the incidents and the amount of force used, in particular, the analysis attempts to draw conclusions about the proportionality of the use of force by assessing both the threat level and the type of severity of the force used, but the threat level is determined based on the officer's own perception. It should be noted that while the data in the dashboards is derived from police reports, the reports and body-worn camera footage are reviewed by sergeants as well as the rest of the chain of command in the use of force, if the use of force is a level 3 and certain level 2s, to ensure the report is accurate. Police strategies was never meant to be the final word, but we have a 3-pronged process to review force: command review, internal affairs, and the dashboards and strategies. Another thing to note is oftentimes, and we've said it, it's very difficult when we discuss the dashboards and the dashboard is used to support the IPA's position. But when the when the dashboard demonstrates that we're progressing in efforts on this police department, they're seen as unreliable. Other shortcomings that he discusses include that under some limited exceptions, not all force is reportable. So the least serious use of force do not show up in data that some reportable uses of force are not reported. Well, let me quote to you Duty Manual Section L2644, which is our definition of reported force. A reportable use of force is defined as any incident in which officers, either on or off duty, exercise their police powers and uses deadly force on any force option, including physical force in confrontation with force option policies. Exceptions to reportable force: the use of a firm grip control which does not result in injury, the appearance of injury or complaint of pain, e.g. the use of a grip to control the suspect's hands while searching and handcuffing, or handcuffing, or that force reasonable to overcome resistance due to the physical disability or intoxication which does not result in injury, the appearance of injury or complaint of pain. The IPA stating that not all force is reportable is not accurate. All force is reportable. If something is not reportable, it's because it's not force, e.g. the use of the grip to control the suspect's hands while searching or handcuffing, or lifting an intoxicated person to a standing position. Again, we encountered a number of cases in which either an officer did not adequately document his or her use of force, or a supervisor did not conduct the required review of the reported force. Internal Affairs determined that a number of cases equaled 3 cases that were sustained in 2017. In Chapter 5, it describes that the dashboard also provided information on the most serious charge referred. Following a use of force incident broken down by race, assault on an officer resulted in 22.9% of all incidents as the most serious charge. Others included obstructing, 10%, assault, 9.1%, and drugs, 7%. He went on to say, of the 629 reported force incidents in 2017, no charges was the most serious charge referred in 6.8 of those incidents. While whites accounted for just 22% of all force incidents, they accounted for 37% of incidents in which no charges were referred. White suspects were considerably more likely to leave the incident with no charges. That was the most serious charge referred in 11.4% of incidents involving white suspects, at a rate that is 81% higher than for blacks and more than 159% higher than for Latinos. Well, our response to that is overall we're looking at a much smaller number of cases, 43 total, in fact. Of the 43 cases, 16 Caucasian suspects had no charge, 15 Hispanic suspects had no charge, and 6 African American suspects had no charge. I think the important thing to highlight here is that if we look at the cases involving mental health, a greater percentage of whites, 30%, and Hispanics, 42%, were documented to have suffered from mental illness, hence the outcome of no charge for 16 Caucasian and 15 Hispanics. In the IPA report, he stated that he recommends the following: for individuals requiring psychiatric evaluation because they may pose a danger to themselves or others, SJPD should transport them to the emergency psychiatric hospital, not to jail, even when such individuals commit the crime of resisting officers. Efforts to detain them for such evaluation, this is what we're doing in the no charges cases. For whites who've had an outcome of no charge, all 16 went to the hospital. Of the 15 cases involving Hispanic suspects, 10 went to the hospital, 3 were released, 1 escaped, and 1 went to jail. Of the 6 cases involving black suspects, 4 went to the hospital, 1 was released, and 1 went to jail. I'll move on. In Chapter 6, the IPA discusses that a decision to place a hold. Oftentimes, complainants do not believe they meet the above criteria and therefore allege the hold was improper. Conversely, family members may believe officers failed to act when an individual clearly met the above criteria, thereby putting the individual and other at risk. Again, the IPA stated we didn't have an actual number based on that, but based on IA's research, there were 18 cases involving mental health issues, and can only recall 1 or 2 that involved an improper hold. The IPA used the word oftentimes. Based on IA's research, there were 18 cases involving mental health issues. Based on Lieutenant Matchett, the commander of IA's recollection, only 1 or 2 alleged improper hold. One area, and I'll just summarize here. I have a few more, but I'll just go with 2 areas that talk about key statistics. On Chapter 8, when we discussed 10% of citizen complaints closed in 2017 arose from a domestic violence incident. First, let me explain quickly what closed versus open or closed investigations mean. It doesn't necessarily mean that we received the complaint in 2017. It simply means that case was closed in 2017. So the cases could have occurred sometime more than likely in 2016 and could have been closed in 2017. However, from the reports, we know that 259 cases were closed in 2017. IA conducted a narrative search for keywords related to domestic violence and determined 16 cases were complaints involving a domestic violence or restraining order incident. That's 6% of the cases that were closed, not 10. So we're trying to figure out where the discrepancy is. But even if we base the IPA on the 10 number, which would be 22 of the 222 IA cases, are stated to involve domestic violence. In 2017, we responded to over 3,474 domestic violence-related calls. This means complaints were made in 0.63% of all DV calls. And using the number of 16, complaints were made in less than 0.5% of all domestic-related calls. And then really the last area that I'll discuss is when we talk about key statistics. One that really stuck out was that 65% of the uses of force in 2017 that involved youth occurred in the context of misdemeanor crime. Now, the dashboards state 30 out of the 46 juvenile incidents are for misdemeanor crimes. But the thing we wanted to know what types of misdemeanor crimes. The IPAs were using force on juveniles at low-level crimes because they're in the context of misdemeanor crime. But what's failed to explain is what type of misdemeanor crimes, what level of force was used in order for us to get better. Followed up with one question that arose from the data is what other possible de-escalation tactics could have helped avoid force being used in a minor, especially in cases of lower level offenses. Police strategies said, officers, quote, officers are more likely to use force with lower justification score against older suspect than a younger suspect. Juveniles tend to have the highest justification scores by which may be due to an officer's reluctance to use force against a minor. It is absolutely warranted, unless it's absolutely warranted. Additionally, officers are more reluctant to use higher levels of force against females, younger suspects, and lighter suspects. So our officers tend to have higher justification to use force on juveniles, and when we do use force at lower levels. When we talk about the individual crimes, we used force on 46 juveniles, 46 out of 629, or about 7.3%. In those cases, we did have 30 incidents that were listed as misdemeanor crimes. 15 of those incidents involved assault on an officer. 4 involved obstructing, 2 involved narcotics, 2 involved liquor, 2 involved theft, 2 involved weapons, 1 was an assault, and there was 1 disorderly and 1 that was as an other. So I will commend, the IPA when we're trying to agree on certain things. When we're trying to not agree to agree, but we're trying to come up to the right conclusion. When we speak about in Chapter 12, the percentage of the audits the IPA agreed with, the 5-year overview, the number of 83% was used. This doesn't include the agree after further, because for 2017, the IPA after further an additional 8%, bringing up the total to 91%. The same goes with use of force, in which they use a number of 73%. Again, this doesn't include the agree after further. For 2017, the IPA agreed after further an additional 8%, bringing the total number of agree after further with force to 81%. One of the things that struck me is I expect our investigations by our Internal Affairs Division to be complete, thorough, fair, and objective. I know the council in this community expects the audits of those investigations by the IPA's office to fit the same criteria. Our response to some of the reports characterizing of this police department and the interpretation of them, some of the statistics does contain some umbrage, but that's because I also expect the audit of this police department to be complete, thorough, fair, and objective. I want to thank the rank and file of this police department, who by any measure are doing an unbelievable job protecting and serving this community. And I want to ensure the community of San Jose that we are never moving backwards. We are moving forwards. And it's a never-ending coaching, it's a never-ending training, it's a never-ending teaching that we'll give this police department. But I can assure you that we will hold that standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right, we have several members of the community who'd like to speak, so I'm going to ask them to come down, and then we'll come back to the council for discussion. All right, Blair Beekman, followed by Adriana Garcia, Elena Alvarado.
Mayor, I'm sorry. Do you want me to do the DII real
Oh, you know what?
quickly?
I'm sorry, you didn't do the EII, did you?
Yeah, no.
Okay,
I can do it real
skipped right
quickly.
over. Everybody, hang on. We're going to come right to you. We're going to complete the last bit of the report, and then we'll go right to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the 10th DII report that's issued by the department. The department initiates and conducts administrative investigations regarding potential misconduct by sworn and non-sworn department members at the direction of the Office of the Chief of Police. For this report, a DII involves either a sworn or non-sworn department member. This differs from, the IPA's reporting, which only reflects sworn department members. There is a distinction between a conduct complaint, which is generated by a citizen, and a DII. A conduct complaint is synonymous with a citizen complaint. The distinction between a conduct complaint and a DII is that a DII is an internal investigation initiated by the Office of the Chief of Police. A DII is often based on an allegation which comes directly from a member of the department who initiates an investigation based on a specific awareness of or a belief that a department policy or procedure or potential violation of the law has occurred. DIIs can be investigated by IA or the department's members' chain of command. IA is responsible for tracking and maintaining DII statistical data, including tracking the dates the DII is received and completed. When the police department draws a distinction between a citizen complaint and a DII, a review of both categories gives the department the ability to identify trends and patterns to improve department training and supervision. If at any time a citizen makes a complaint against a department member and the complaint is associated to an existing DII investigation, the DII will be reclassified as a conduct complaint. As with that of any conduct complaint, the IPA will then be notified and may audit the investigation. If you look at, we don't have a presentation, but if you look at your charts, in 2017, in Appendix 1A, the department initiated 35 sworn DIIs, compared to 43 in 2016. The total number of DIIs between 2013 and 2017 fluctuated, with a high of 43 in 2016 and a low of 12 in 2013. In 2017, the department initiated 10 non-sworn DIIs compared to 11 in 2016. The total number of DIIs between 2013 and 2017 also fluctuated, with a high of 11 in 2014 and 2016, respectively. Of the 35 DIIs on Chart 1B, of the 35 sworn DIIs initiated in 2017, there were a total of 99 misconduct allegations against sworn staff, compared to 58 in 2016. A DII may include more than one allegation of misconduct. The total numbers of allegations received against sworn staff between 2013 and 2017 fluctuated, with 2017 having the highest total. In 2017, the department received 16 allegations against non-sworn members. The same number was received in 2016. The total number of allegations against non-sworn members between 2013 and 2017 fluctuated, with a high of 30 in 2014. In 2017, the department completed investigations of 78 allegations against sworn officers. 47 or 60% of the allegations were sustained. Between 2013 and 2017, the department completed investigations of 253 allegations against sworn officers. 158 or 62% of those allegations were sustained. Please note, investigations may not be completed with the same calendar year. In 2017, the department completed investigations of 31 allegations against non-sworn members. 28 or 90% of those allegations were sustained. Between 2013 and 2017, the department completed investigations of 110 allegations against non-sworn members. 82 or 74% of those allegations were sustained. Between 2013 and 2017, the most common misconduct allegations for sworn and non-sworn department members were procedure and conduct on becoming an officer or employee. Just to note, procedure is an allegation that an action taken by a department member did not follow appropriate department and or city policies, procedures, or guidelines. Conduct on becoming an officer or CUBO, an officer's conduct either on or off duty which adversely reflects on the department is deemed to be conduct on becoming an officer. Each case of misconduct will be examined to determine if the act was such that a reasonable person would find such conduct was on becoming an officer. Among the 43 sworn investigations completed in 2017, 12 involved officers with 21 to 30 years of experience. while 11 involved officers with 0 to 3 years of experience. For non-sworn employees, 6 of the 14 DIIs involved employees with 7 to 10 years of experience. And then finally, between 2013 and 2017, documented oral counseling was the most common form of discipline imposed for both sworn and non-sworn department members. Documented oral counseling was imposed on a total of 65 occasions during this rating period. With that, I'll submit it, Mayor.
Thanks, Chief. Okay. All members of the committee I just called, come on down. Everybody's got 2 minutes to speak. In addition to those I called, Mr. Beekman, Ms. Garcia, Ms. Alvarado, Sandy Sanchez, and Jim, it looks like Showman. I can't quite read the writing. Come on up.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt the order here, but anyway, I'm part of
I'm
the
sorry, you,
group.
Mr. Showman?
I'm sorry, my name is Jim
Great.
Showman,
Perfect, thank you.
and I'm part of a group of families who the last thing in the world we'd like to do is be here, but it's a family that is growing far too often because of a new thing that we now have an acronym, OIS, Officer Involved Shooting. It's happening way too often. It affects us. We're in pain. We are, deal with it daily. I don't know how to express it any more simply than that, but really when I'm here, fortunately, we met with the new IPA, Aaron Zisser, before he took office, or took his position, he visited SVD Bug, and SVD Bug is an organization that's helped our families get together and share our pain. And Aaron came and listened to our stories and then invited us to his office individually and spoke. So along with that, we were very pleased that he provided us the 2017 IPA report, and the group of us got together and went over this, and that's a document Aaron mentioned in his report. It's been submitted for hopefully your consideration and review. Again, my daughter, Diana Marie Showman, was shot August 14th, 2014, and she had mental health issues. And I don't really want to get into the details of it, but after this occurred, my wife and I sought legal counsel, and with the help of our legal counsel, they recommended that we submit, a complaint, a complaint with the independent auditor at the time, Ladoris Cordell. We learned at that time that we had to do it ourselves. The IPA is not allowed to go investigate without a complaint. Had we not been privy to legal counsel, we would not have known this. So people of lower income who maybe they're not American citizens, they probably don't know that this is available to them. And so I applaud the independent auditor in his new report, and again, I hope you approve this report. Thank you.
Sir. Thank you.
Hello. I'd like to thank everyone here today and for this report. To mention 3 things, when I go up to other cities in the East Bay, they give compliments to the San Jose Police, and hopefully this can be a time that you can start to learn from them a bit, perhaps. And the city of Berkeley, they have a good mental health program going on about police intervention issues. They're really trying to work something out. It's something you should look into. The city of Oakland has practiced during the fall how to better understand their stoppage issues. And there is also, the ACLU has created a whistleblower protection program that is specifically meant for police officers that I think would be a really good way to bridge, open progressive ideas about how how we can all work together on these sorts of issues. With that said, I had a few other things to mention. It sounds like you're really working on something hopeful and positive for 2018. There is a few things coming through at this time that can make for a positive 2018, so we don't have to so much rely on law and order measures anymore, or at least at this time. And I hope you're into that, and I hope the rest of 2018 can be a process towards that. There is women's issues being worked on this summer, domestic violence issues. I think that is a much softer way to address law and order issues at this time. And I hope that will be a tremendous effort from all of us this summer and to make for a positive community. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Adriana. I'm an advocate at Sacred Heart Community Service. We want to thank the Police Auditor's Office for providing the IPA year-round report. We were concerned about the findings around SJPD need to cut some of their proactive policing efforts to combat DV and services available to survivors. One of the things on the report highlighted a failure to take a report of a violation of a restraining order because the person causing harm was in a public space. This is really alarming because we help our clients, our victims, survivors to make these reports on restraining order violations. And they've been told anything from, we don't have an officer that can come out and take the report right now, to keep calling back, you just have to keep calling back, to simply stay in your house or stay in your car. That's not okay. Last February, a woman was murdered across the street from Sacred Heart. And the woman, she was a client and a member of Sacred Heart. She had a restraining order, and she was killed there. We are working with a client right now, and she's made about 6 to 7 police reports. And we've been there with her to do them, and nothing has happened yet. Nobody has responded yet. We appreciate that SJPD is taking steps to take gender-based violence seriously in our community. However, when DV unit officers carry over 140 cases each, and the unit consists of 1 sergeant and 2 investigators with over 3,300 cases, this does not support the need of our community. It doesn't. Programs and services have been cut, and the ones that suffer and continue to be re-victimized are the survivors. We support the recommendations of the auditor's report in addressing the short staffing issue and continuing to add additional services for our community, as well as looking into how we can better support our community together.
Thank you. Welcome. Are you Ms. Alvarado? Yes. Okay. After Ms. Alvarado, I just want to call a few more folks up. Just one moment, please. Thank you. Sharon Watkins, Karina Cardenas, Kimberly Phillips, and Sheila Dawkins. Thank you.
So she's going to go, and then I'm going to translate.
Okay, está bien.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Elena y soy un líder del colectivo del Sagrado Corazón. Estoy aquí para darle las gracias a la Oficina de la Auditoría de Policía en San José, para pedirles que apoyen las recomendaciones que ellos han dado tocante a cómo responder a la violencia doméstica. En mi comunidad, cuando una persona llama a la policía para pedir ayudas, muchas veces es con mucho miedo a lo que pueda pasar, miedo a la policía y miedo a algunas ocasiones a inmigración. Cuando alguien llama y pide una orden de restricción y la policía no viene o no nos toma en cuenta, es como si no estuviéramos diciendo que no les importamos y nos sentimos como víctimas otra vez. Si esta ciudad quiere vivir sus valores y seguir combatiendo contra la violencia de género, les pedimos que por favor escuchen las recomendaciones de tener más personal en el Departamento de Violencia Doméstica y que se tomen en cuenta a las personas que llaman a pedir ayuda y que la policía acuda lo más pronto que sea posible y en vez de ayudarnos a la comunidad, muchas veces nos mandan a emigración para que a la comunidad y al inmigrante lo lastimen. Muchas gracias por su atención.
Good evening. My name is Elena, and I am a leader in the Colectivo at Sacred Heart Community Service. I am here to thank the Auditor's Office of San Jose and to ask that you support the recommendations as they relate to domestic violence. In my community, when a person calls the police to ask for help, many times it is with a lot of fear. Fear of what can happen, fear of the police, and fear of times of immigration. When a survivor calls and asks them for a restraining order and the police do not arrive or don't take us into account, it's like they are it's like saying that we don't matter. And we feel re-victimized again. If the city wants to live to their values and keep combating against gender violence, then we ask that you listen to the recommendations. More personnel in the DV unit and always take the victims into account first. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Sharon Watkins, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak to you. I want to specifically address the crisis intervention training. According to a report, it's less than 100% of the San Jose police officers have actually had the training, and the recommended refresher training is a bulletin that comes out every other month. This is unacceptable, and you should be outraged, and I'll tell you why. My son, Philip Watkins, was shot and killed on February 11th, 2015. He was having a mental crisis. He was shot 10 times while his 2.5-year-old daughter was sitting in the car. Excuse me, I just need a minute.
Take your time.
To take such a nonchalant attitude toward crisis intervention training is telling the community that our lives are not worth 40 hours a year. And even more so, let's narrow it down. You're telling each family, each mother, each father, each son, each daughter, that their life is not worth 40 hours a year. You're telling me, Sharon, your son, your 23-year-old son, Philip Watkins, your son that was working 2 jobs, your son that had a goal to finish his bachelor's degree, to raise his daughter, to get married, to become a productive member of society, he wasn't worth 40 hours a year. You're telling his daughter, who is now going to be 6, that her life, it doesn't matter that she turned 3 without her daddy there. She turned 4. She started kindergarten without her daddy. She is graduating from kindergarten, and her daddy won't be there on June 14th. When she gets married, when she has her first date, when she goes on a prom, when she starts to like boys, anything, her daddy won't be there. Why? Because we are not worth 40 hours a year. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Watkins. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Kimberly Phillips, and I'm going to try to keep this as brief and short as I possibly can. My son was murdered on August 10, 2015, despite what you guys put out on the press release, and I'm going to direct that to you, Eddie Garcia, and all the police over here. They said he committed suicide. I filed several complaints, several. Aaron's predecessor, Walter Katz, had a personal conversation with me when I found the blood spatter outside my house. He said he struggled with it. Personally told me if I can find out that the camera angle really did move, because I found out my camera angle moved, I had missing data, I was a witness, so I'll remind everybody politely you weren't there. And I begged, and I still beg for an investigation, and I'm constantly told that this doesn't exist. But my baby's blood is still all over my screen door. They swear they never shot him. They shot him right up in front of me, his 11-year-old brother at the time, and his sister. There are several witnesses. And for everyone in here to discount my witness statement is disheartening. And I'm going to tell you, I don't personally wipe off my son's blood because that's silencing his truth. And to be, for me, I went on because no one wanted to take my witness statements. I took it upon myself to get forensics done. I decided to have my digital camera forensically analyzed. And yes, the officers did move my camera significantly. Footage was removed. It's out in space now. And I actually got an extra added bonus. Our chief of police here says he wants to be transparent. Well, let me help you out. You personally gave me an altered 911 call. And I proved that. And I in turn filed another complaint. Only for you, Eddie Garcia, to tell me that what I filed was not unbecoming of an officer. Now I need to know, where do I go to file a complaint on you, our chief of police, for my city of San Jose, because nobody here is safe. And for everyone to look at me and look at all these families out here and do absolutely nothing when the truth speaks for itself, you guys are all murderers. My son was not only murdered by the police, but he was murdered by all of you, and I'm being murdered every single day.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name's Sandy Sanchez. I'm the mother of Anthony Nunez. This is my son right here. This is my son, Eddie. Look at it really good, okay? He was only 18 years old. 2 calls for help were made. He was suffering from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head. 2 calls were made for help, and instead of helping my son, they shot him and they killed him in front of our home where he should have been safe. My son's diploma was in the school office for a whole year before I can go pick it up. He was working so hard to graduate high school and go to the Army, but your officers took that from him. And after they murdered my son, they high-fived each other like it was a good kill. What kind of officers do we have running our streets? These are the officers that you praise, that you say, what a great police department you have. Well, you're a piece of shit. I'm sorry, excuse my language, but you don't have a great police. I mean, these officers gave each other a high five. Mr. Liccardo, how do you think that makes us feel? He was only 18 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him. He needed help. And he was gunned down like a dog in front of our home for the whole neighborhood to see. He was killed at 5:51 p.m. and his body was left in front of my house till 2 in the morning. Why? Why? So all our neighbors could see him out there in front of our home. There's video camera that shows my son's body in front of our home till 2 in the morning. I wasn't here to save him. We called to serve. You were supposed to serve and protect. You took an oath. Why take a life? Why was that the first response? Why not use every other tactic that you guys train your officers to use? Why deadly force? He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have anything. He needed help. And instead of helping him, they gunned him down. They killed him. I have a 21-year-old that was studying to be a police officer. His dream was to be a homicide detective. He said, Mom, I want to bring closure to these families that, that lose their loved ones. And now you know what he says? I don't want to be a part of the worst gang of America, which is San Jose Police Department or our police department, because they're being murdered. They're murdering our children. And I had 3 kids, and he was my youngest. He was my baby. You know how hard it is to see all these graduations, all these things that are going on, and I can't be there. I can't celebrate that. I had to take my son's diploma to the grave where he's buried. It's so hard. It's so hard for our families. Please make change. Talk to us. Find out about our families. Talk to us so you can know we're not criminals. We're not drug addicts. We're good, hardworking people. I had a daycare in my home, for God's sake, and my son was shot dead in front of our home. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Are you Ms. Cardenas?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, it's really hard for me to speak. So my dad was killed in 2004, not by the San Jose PD, but we dealt with them during the investigation. And I will tell you from experience, I understand their pain because you have nobody there to help you. So you could imagine your loved one is killed by someone on the street and you have the police there to say, you know what? We're gonna find that killer, we're gonna help you, we're gonna be there to give you justice. When it's the police department, you have nobody to help you, nobody. When my father died, the only people that came out was Silicon Valley Debug, and they said, we're gonna help you and we're gonna figure it out. I can tell you, it's been 14 years. I still struggle with anxiety, like if I'm around a lot of cops, because I was treated really poorly. I was interrogated. They wouldn't tell me my father died. They said, if you want to find out, come to the police station. Threw me into an interrogation room. First thing they did was try to prove that my father had mental health issues to justify the shooting. I mean, we have not come. It's the same. It's like been 14 years, and it's so sad that it's the same. I did meet with Aaron, and it was really nice just to have somebody to listen to our story and just I don't know. He just the caring nature of him listening. I will say one thing though. The statements of an officer-involved shooting. I met with Rob Davis years ago. He's not here. And he said that they would not tell the media anything until the investigation was cleared, and that's never taken place. So I don't know if that can, but that's very important for family members. So, yeah, sorry. It's hard for me to speak, but yeah, that's my only thing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
After Ms. Dawkins, Lori Valdez, Hiemi Hirma, please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Said Formaris, again, please forgive me if I've just mispronounced your name. And Alice Lynch and Robert Aguirre. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Sheila Dawkins. I'm a volunteer for PACT, and I just wanted to follow all the impactful statements by the mothers and the families of those who are lost to police violence, to just say this is really a moment where we should look at transparency and building trust. And we know that our IPA and the chief of police have been working collaboratively to get some things done in the city, but to have that established on paper and making policy making a part of that process would make sure that it would last after both of them passed on the baton to the next leadership. So that's really what we think should be the step, because we see this need and it's not going away. And the fact that a number of the mothers who spoke for Philip and Aaron and Anthony shared the need for really looking at what's going on with the mental health process and how that's being handled. And when we have policies in place, that establishes something to leave a legacy for you, Mayor, as well as for our IPA office and our chief of police, so our city can be safer and there can be more trust on the streets. And we appreciate your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Valdez.
It's me again.
Ms. Valdez, please address
Hi,
the
my name is
council.
Lori Valdez. And I'm here to say I support Aaron's IPA thing. And what I want to say is Antonio, my partner, wasn't killed by San Jose PD, but San Jose PD did do the investigation. And it's been over 4 years and I still have no answers. But in reading the recent police report that I finally got my hands on, It's disturbing to me how the San Jose PD couldn't charge Antonio with a felony assault on an officer when they killed him that day. I don't understand that. How do you charge Antonio assault on a police officer when he's dead? I found that out recently, and it's really disturbing. Because the day they killed Antonio, they took my son's father away. They took my son's innocence away. They took my son's sense of safety. And I'm going to tell you, it does affect the kids. And the fact that none of the police officers are not trauma-informed taught. They don't know what trauma is because they don't want to see it. I've showed Garcia a video of my son crying for his dad. And he was choked up about it. And I told him, his officers need to see the impact in the aftermath in order for them to understand. These are human beings. Just like they have families, the people that they kill also have families, and there's also children. My son recently, I was pulled over by San Jose PD like a week and a half ago on the east side of San Jose. And I didn't get the police officer's badge number or card number because my kids were in the car, and they were both terrified. My son said, "Mom, I'm scared the cops are going to kill you." When he said that to me, I was angry as hell. He says, "Mom, I think I'm going to poop my pants. I'm so scared." That made me even more mad. And the officers had his lights bright on me, right? I'm not afraid because I know I didn't do nothing wrong, so I was wondering why I was getting pulled over. And I was leaving a clinic on the east side because my daughter got hurt at school, and I had to have her go get checked out at a night clinic. And it was around 9:30 at night, and I didn't see no cop nowhere. So I'm assuming the officers were in the parking lot where I was at, and they seen my Jeep with the sticker that says about Antonio and police, because I've gotten stopped many times for that sticker. And because out of the blue, I was driving, getting ready to get on the freeway to go home, and all of a sudden, an SUV cop's right behind me, flashes the light, pulls me over. I pull over. He asked me for my ID, my registration, my license. He says, "Do you have that?" I said, "Well, of course I do." So he goes, "Okay." He goes, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" I said, "I have no clue. Tell me." He says, you just passed a red light right in front of me. You like stopped and you went." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Where?" He goes, "Right there." I said,
I'm sorry, if you could wrap it up.
Okay, so then after, well, it was all over and said and done, the officer gets my license. He doesn't give me a ticket for supposedly passing a red light, and then he tells me, "I don't need your insurance or anything like that." So I look at him, my daughter says, "Mom, then why did he stop you?" And I says, "Exactly." And so I said, she goes, "But don't ask him anything, Mom." She goes, "Because he could kill you. They get away with it, and then we'll be without you and Papi." So I want you to know that San Jose has a deep-rooted history of San Jose PD doing that. It hasn't changed. Like Corina said, it hasn't changed. It's just learned to cover it better. Thank you.
All right. Sharma?
Hello, my name is Sade Formariz. I'm a junior at Cristo Rey San Jose High School on the east side. All I want to say is one of these stories is too many. No one should feel like this. As a young person who plans to continue to be an active member in this wonderful city, this isn't the future that I want. Thousands of us feel that there's a negative relationship between citizens and law enforcement, and I urge you to follow the recommendations of the IPA to fix this. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Yemi Gurma, and I'm a PACT Beloved community leader. And I'm not really certain what community policing will look like in San Jose, but I am in agreement with the IPA's recommendation, and I'm happy to hear his report today. As a mother, I am pleased that San Jose PD has embraced the philosophies of the procedural justice training. I had the privilege of participating in the train the trainer session, and I actually sat in a couple of actual trainings at San Jose PD. It is a remarkable training that it's remarkable that all of San Jose PD officers have been trained, but I strongly feel that this is the first step. We need to put in place a strategic plan to go from theory to of procedural justice to actual practice, as well as doing some fidelity testing to ensure that the training is being utilized in the way it was intended. If I can make some suggestions, I know in my line of work, I review a lot of police reports, and one of the things that can be done is incorporate a section in the actual police reports that officers write with the notion of the ideas like for community banking and the platinum rule. That can easily be incorporated as a daily practice for officers to actually think about what are the ways that I have engaged in the community where I'm making a deposit or actually taking out a withdrawal, and what are the things that can be done differently as a personal growth as they professionally grow. Because at the end of the day, it's not the theory of procedural justice that's going to make a difference in this community, but it's the actual daily practice. And I want to have some conversations about how we do that in San Jose to impact change. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
My name is Alice Lynch. I'm a resident of District 6, member of the First Unitarian Church, and a member of PAC's Beloved Community Team. And I first want to say that I really appreciate all the work that went into this report, as well as the fact that we got the responses from the police department at the same time to review. I found the case studies that were included very helpful for understanding the nuances that are involved in the situations that the recommendations are based on. And I want to comment on two recommendations that are actually from previous years that are in the appendix. The first one is from 2015. It's on page 107, recommendation 1. It regards publishing the use of force data. And as we heard earlier, the police department has posted a public dashboard and is committed to updating the reports in the dashboard periodically, which is really fantastic. This is a really good step. But as we also heard, there are limitations to that data. So I really encourage that we not solely rely on that source, and that the police department continue to provide the quarterly reports that they do, because they have a lot of expertise to analyze the data that I think would be really valuable to highlight their key findings. And the second one is from 2016. That's on page 117. Recommendation 7C about creating tiers of force. Last October, the police department implemented a categorized use of force policy, which involves greater supervisory review of the use of force incidents. And I understand that they have committed to review the new policy within 6 months, which I believe means that that would be by the end of April. And I would request an update on that review, because I think it's very important that that be done. And
Thank you. Thank you very much. After Mr. Geary is Reverend Nancy Palmer Jones, Christine Clifford, Molly McLeod.
Well, thank you, Mayor, council members, IPA office, and police department. Thank you all for letting me have this time. I'd like to talk about a couple of different things. Again, referring to the recommendations that were in here before. Recommendation number 2 from 2015, talking about the review of encampment cleanup and procedures. SJPD responded that they are no longer responsible for the personal property of homeless individuals during encampment cleanups. And the relationship responsibility has been transferred to the homeless response team, housing department. And the role of SPD, this is the interesting part, during these cleanups is to provide on-site security for the homeless response team. There's nothing there that says that they're also to protect the rights of the homeless. And I think that's very much a responsibility to serve and protect all citizens and not just those that are doing the sweep. So I would like to see that changed. Another thing I'd like to see changed is on the body-worn cameras, that police officers not be allowed to review that footage until after their report is written. So they don't write a report that matches what is written, but rather they write down their response. And then later on, we can see if that response is actually lining up with what is reality. The victims themselves do not have the opportunity to review any footage prior to their statements, and I don't think that the police department should have that privilege as well. And I thank you, Mayor, for allowing people to go a little bit beyond their time. Very generous of you to do so, but I think there's some very deep stories that are hurting people, and I think the number of people of color that are on this dais can understand that when you're being pulled over by the police and that police officer is walking over and he's got his hand on his gun, you're already a victim of violence, because that is not equitable. That is not the way you treat people. You go up to them and you find out what's going on before you pull your gun. So I think that needs to change as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Reverend.
So I'm the Reverend Nancy Palmer Jones. I'm the senior minister at the First Unitarian Church of San Jose, and I'm a faith leader with the PAC's Beloved Community Movement. Thanks to Aaron and the chief and the mayor and the city council. And I want to zero in on the recommendations around expanding the role of the Independent Police Auditor. And I want to say that I see light at the end of the tunnel. I have something positive to offer here. There's an image rising up in my preacher's heart. It feels like we began these conversations a number of years ago, and we're all standing in different roads, seeing different ways forward. And through the dialogues that we have brought together, hundreds of members of the community and thousands of our congregants have been touched and informed. All of the electeds and the police officers and so many other people, the increasing leadership among young people of color of the Beloved Community Movement, we ourselves, I have experienced this building of trust and the sense of these roads starting to come towards each other. We have been transparent and accountable with each other, and although there have been bumps in the road, and there obviously still are, there are obstacles, we have been able to find our way around so many of them. So we have been changed by this process, and now I honestly see all of these roads coming together on some particular specific areas of the expansion of the role of the IPA. I believe we could bring together the police and the IPA, the POA, the community, and the electeds, and we can make these some of these expansions official through an MOU. So let us get this done. In the Christian scriptures and in the Hebrew scriptures, it says that for the righteous, the holy will make the way smooth. I believe that after all the bumps in the road, there is some smoothness in this particular part of the journey. And so I also want to quote Bishop Michael Curry from that big event that happened in London on Saturday. Let us use the redemptive power of love to make this old world a new world, for love is the only way. That is the way of trust building and the coming together of these roads through this massive arch that's possible now. Thanks.
Thank you, Reverend.
Good evening. My name is Molly McLeod. I'm supportive of increased authority for the Independent Police Auditor's Office and the new format of the report. I want to share an example of police misconduct. I'm filing a complaint with the IPA tonight. My 17-year-old son was brought by a Gunderson High School staff member to an empty office. A police officer walked into the office. The first words he directed towards my son was "monster fiend." I'm going to hold up a picture of my youngest son with the The words of this police officer sink in. Monster fiend. Monster fiend. It's the Green Scholar, Councilmember Jones. And I live in your council district, Councilmember Davis. My son didn't feel free to return to his class. Keep in mind, school administrators can suspend for willful defiance, and leaving the office and police officer's presence could be construed that way. My son was not Mirandized before or during the interrogation. He was threatened with arrest and told by the time it would go to court he would be an adult. I wish my son had followed the ACLU or Debug's Know Your Rights suggestions. Instead, he defended his innocence, offered to let the police officer search his body, backpack, locker, and car. I need him to watch the news a little bit more often and have a few more conversations with him, clearly. White mother raising black sons. As a parent, I've talked about how to react next time. As a young black teen and almost adult, there will likely be a next time. As a San Jose resident and niece of a retired San Jose Police Department sergeant, I hope the words monster fiend won't come out of any officer's mouths. Constitutional rights must be respected. I'm also supportive of the IPA's mental health recommendations. When I came before the council for the study session in January, I shared my eldest son has a mental health history, and he was hit, tasered, choked by SJPD, and charged with resisting arrest. I didn't file a complaint then, and I regretted it, and therefore it was not investigated. Didn't brought to the IPA's attention, and that's why I am filing a complaint tonight about my youngest son's experiences on March 30th of this year. My eldest is in a coma, and so I've just finally written this out and came tonight because I found out about this meeting. Although my youngest son's experience was far less severe than my eldest or experiences brought to you tonight, nevertheless, it is damaging. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Christine Clifford? Okay. All right, thank you to all the members of the community who came out to speak this evening. We'll return to the council now for discussion and for questions. No one is going to jump in, then I will. Oh, Councilmember Pross?
Yeah, I think it's just difficult to be able to speak after obviously hearing all of that. So I don't think anybody certainly jumping in and wanting to cover that. But thank you first off to our community members that came out to speak. I certainly think I can speak for everybody up here. Not easy, obviously. Nowhere near being able to even understand being in your shoes, but nowhere easy for us, to be able to hear that, because that's certainly not what anybody hopes for in their community or for situations to end in the way that we heard so many community members here come out and speak, and how powerful it is to have family members, loved ones, parents of people that have lost their life at the hands of officers here in our city. Very, very impactful. And so thank you for being willing to come and engage with us. And I know a number of you have participated in community meetings. I've sat down with some of you in those community meetings. And I thank you for participating in those as well. You could very easily decide to take up positions of just opposition, or just distancing yourself and not wanting to engage. But instead, you have chosen to try and engage in this process and in this system, and in my mind, and what we hear, at least what I've heard, to make it better, and hopefully to be able to avoid situations like this. And I can tell you, as a former full-time officer and currently a reserve with the San Jose Police Department, it's not something that I, nor anybody that I have worked with, want to be a part of. Having to take somebody's life or even hurt somebody. There are certainly bad apples out there in the world and in every single career. That's no doubt. And in fact, we saw that today in the report that our police department puts forward with the department-initiated investigations, where sometimes internally they even find officers that are violating police duty manual, protocols, sometimes even violating the law. And we know we've seen this over the last couple years as well, sometimes even to the extent where they're being arrested, charged, tried, and found guilty of that. It happens. It's unfortunate. We would like for that never to happen, especially in this line of work, where you would hope that you get people with the utmost integrity. But it's the case that just like anybody in life, people are susceptible to making mistakes and bad decisions. And so, for one, I appreciate, obviously, the job that our police department does with being able to investigate internally its own and doing the right thing in that regards. But I certainly will reemphasize, not myself nor anybody that I have worked with on this police department has had an interest to be involved in any situation where they're having to use lethal force or they are having to hurt somebody. That's not something that any of us take any kind of liking to. It's not in a natural human nature to want to do that. And when you're on the receiving end of that, I certainly understand how that can feel as though that might not be the case. And when your family members or loved ones are on the receiving end of that, I understand that as well, is why that might not be the case. But I think if you do take an opportunity, as some of you have, which is, I feel, the most important thing, Reverend Nancy spoke to it as love. I think I can maybe simplify it even further and just call it understanding, or simply just being able to know each other a little better, which might help lead you to love. But I think that is probably the most powerful thing that we need to continue to work on as a community as a whole, especially with our police department, our police officers, and our community members. Because I can guarantee you, and I know I ran into these situations myself, and I know every officer out there as well has, when you have a relationship with someone out in the community, you're a school resource officer and you're engaging with students on the campus, or you're out in the community and it's a beat you've been working in for a while, and you engage with someone that you have some relationship, some past relationship with, be it, numerous or even just one time, that adds in to the opportunity of that situation ending up better on both sides. From a community member maybe responding a little differently to an officer that they know. Maybe they know a little bit about them. They know they're a father. They know they're somebody that genuinely doesn't want to just go out and hurt people. Or on the officer standpoint, knowing this is maybe a troubled youth, somebody they've dealt with before, but they understand some of the circumstances. Maybe they're living with grandma, or their parents are gone, or somebody's been arrested and they've had some negative interactions with officers before. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that if you can relate just on even one instance of knowing somebody a little bit deeper than having that be your first unfortunate interaction with them, it can go a hell of a long way. And it has for me, and I know it has for other officers. And so I can't emphasize enough the work that we're doing in regards to trying to build that relationship between just our community members and our officers, be it with the community meetings that we've hosted with PAC, that the police department is hosting on their own, the coffees with a cop just sitting down with an officer, sitting down with community members, and a number of opportunities that we still engage in, and I even chose to engage in while I was an officer, attending neighborhood meetings, community policing events, attending programs like Camp Everytown, where we still send officers to, being CIT trained, and now that mandatory implementation, I know we heard a community member come and speak to that in regards to what was in the report in regards to ensuring those skills, those perishable skills, are not lost. And how do we ensure that even though we've now maybe trained our officers in CIT and we're ensuring that our new officers are getting trained in CIT, that we don't lose those perishable skills and that we continue those and we ensure that every single officer has those. Projects like the Parent Project, where we work with the DA's office and have an opportunity to engage with families and students on a much more, I think, close basis. Gang prevention classes that we host, our PAL programs. I could go on, and the chief knows, but in fact, even with all of those, we obviously still lack a strong or even potential for a stronger relationship, I think, with our community. I think this chief has recognized that and has made it a priority to try and continue to build those relationships. But we need to do more. And I can't think of a better way to start than to do that. Now, laying that foundation, because that's certainly not going to solve every single issue out there, and it's not going to make everything better. I think it's the basis of the foundation, though. And as Nancy spoke to it as love again, there's certainly, what we have today, which is some suggestions from our independent police auditor in regards to complaints that have come in from the community. There's reporting from our police chief in regards to department-initiated investigations, and obviously recommendations that I think we have an opportunity to discuss today to see if we can improve transparency and then hopefully improve outcomes in the end between these interactions with our police officers and the community. And so I do want to transition to that conversation, and thank you, Aaron, for your first report here, and know that there's a lot of work that goes into this, and certainly not necessarily an easy task. And thank you, Chief, for your thorough responses and being able to dive into each of these areas and give honest responses as well in regards to where we're at. And certainly, I think it goes without saying that there's going to be conflict between an independent police auditor independently overviewing complaints coming into our police department, and as well as recommendations for policy changes coming from that perspective, that outside perspective, and a police chief trying to run a police department in the best way possible. And I do really appreciate the responses. I know one of the items that I wanted to talk a little bit about is this recommendation on crisis intervention training. And Chief, you had responded to that in regards to periodic refreshers and this monthly bulletin trainings. Is there a refresher course, something that's lesser, right, than the 40 hours for the full CIT? Is there a course that's out there now?
There's a refresher 8-hour course that's out now.
Is that something that's required to take, or is that something it's not required to take?
That's not required to take.
What are the training bulletins? What are those covering, and who's providing those? Is that Post or?
That would be our sergeant in charge of crisis intervention. That would be providing the training.
Are these Post trainings though, or what?
Are you talking about the bulletins, or are you talking about the 8-hour course?
Oh, now I'm talking about the bulletins.
The bulletins wouldn't be necessarily Post certified. They would just be trainings and refreshers that we have.
Okay, but the 8-hour course is a Post?
The 8-hour course is. The 8-hour course is. Here's the issue with the 8-hour course. It's not necessarily that we're opposed to the 8-hour course, but we're in the process of getting everybody through the department to be CIT trained. And, we want to make sure that we accomplish that goal. And so the 8-hour course is something that in the foreseeable future we can accomplish once we get every single member of this police department trained. That's our reservation.
So we're no longer just training then our new hires. We're also trying to get every single officer in the department trained.
Every single officer in this police department.
Okay, I think that is that's obviously a huge step in the right direction. I would agree, though, that it's a perishable skill, and it's certainly one that we've seen, I think, a positive response from. And so I would like to see the commitment be there for in the future, that we have this, especially once we can get every officer trained, that we figure out how we're going to work in and on what rotation, how many years we think, to get this perishable skill back in the training circuit for at least the 8-hour course. I would agree that somebody doesn't have to go through a full 40-hour course again every few years, but in regards to the 8-hour course, I would agree, though, as well, that most important thing, and I know that this is a newer recommendation just over the last few years, to get everybody CIT trained, and we've implemented that now with our new hires and recruits. I wasn't fully aware that we were doing that with all of our officers. So I would agree that that's the most important thing. because we certainly have a lot of officers that, you know, that been on the beat for a long time, and they have never had the CIT training. So I think that's important to prioritize that. But I appreciate hearing that would be the goal, to then roll in a refresher course.
Philosophically, again, council member, definitely not opposed. I'm not opposed to it. I mean, it is a skill that needs to get refreshed from time to time. It's just a manner of which we do that at the point that what's trying to separate what's more important at the moment.
Yeah, no, I understand. I absolutely would agree with you. It's more important that every officer gets CIT trained, because I think, you know, that in itself, right, is something we have not had. We may even be one of the first departments to do so. I don't know if that's the case. Maybe smaller departments out there are obviously doing that as well, but I know that we had some of the first CIT officers, and I know the program has been going well. And again, it's had, I think, a good response from the community. So I'm just happy to hear that. I'll also add, I could probably use a refresher myself. Certainly there was a lot that went into that training. And I do know as officers as well, we have opportunities to do some refresher courses or take different courses. Obviously, there's a lot of them that are mandated already, and we do those online. And certainly something that, in regards to the bulletins and what's provided, I think it will be good for officers to take advantage of that in the meantime.
Councilmember, if I can just add real quick, it's one of the issues as we talk about staffing being such an important issue. I remember being back in the early 90s where we would take officers off the street for an entire week to give them training.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we just simply have not been able to do that as much. As we start beefing up this police department and growing as an organization, and we're going to have an opportunity to be able to take officers off the streets to give them additional training without jeopardizing public safety. And so that's something definitely that's on the horizon, that not just CIT, but there's other issues, domestic violence, sexual assault. I mean, there's other trainings that I know are important to this council and important to the community, that once we start ramping up our numbers, that we will be able to take officers off the street to give them that training and at the same time provide public safety.
Yeah, and in fact, you know, I think it is heartbreaking to kind of always roll back to that, to what happened to this department when staffing levels dropped so low. I think we had a lot of community members that understood the potential implications of that, but we constantly are able to point back to that, this being another one, and certainly community policing was another. I know, you know, immediately one of the things that obviously dropped off were things like what I was talking about, things like cops participating in Camp Everytown, being able to be there for a week, programs like that officers were unable to participate in with the sheer, you know, inadequate staffing that we had. And I think that I'm certainly happy that is changing. And I absolutely myself look forward to when we are staffed up fully and we can bring back all the units, do what it is that I think a fully staffed department is capable of. And that would include exactly what you just mentioned here in regards to freeing up the time as well for these trainings, be it they're mandatory ones or just ones that we feel we want to include in, that may not be mandatory post-standard trainings, but ones that we feel we add in addition to. That was, for me, one that I think stood out the most. I think there were a number of other recommendations in here, some that you did contest, and I feel as though you provided some adequate responses to in regards to what the difference is there. And then majority of them that you were in agreement with, and then policy procedures that I think could be updated, that certainly will make it better for both our community and our police department. So I thank you for that, and I'll rest on my comments for now and let my colleagues chime in.
Thank you. Just to build a bit on some of Councilmember Peralta's questions, Chief, the refresher training, how many hours is that typically?
There's a post-certified, I believe, refresher training that's 8 hours.
8 hours, okay. And then the full CIT training is that 40?
It's 40.
Okay. And I know that when you came in as chief, we had, I'm guessing, probably a minority of officers that were trained in CIT. I know you've been trying to ramp it up very quickly. I think roughly 140, 150 last year. Is that right?
I don't know the specific numbers offhand, Mayor, but I'll tell you, I think we're close to, at this point, close to 700 officers in the department being trained. And obviously every single academy class that's coming in.
Right. So at our current rate, can we get there? I know you can't just take everybody off the beat, but can we get there by 2019? Is that realistic?
Our classes right now are scheduled through early 2020. But that's certainly something that, you know, I can bring back and talk to staff. I mean, we could definitely try to do our best to ramp it up and try to get some outside resources to assist and help. I have spoken to our crisis intervention sergeant, who's stated that, we're going to try to ramp up that unit a little bit as well, for some needs. So it's something that we could definitely take back and see if we can rework some of the things. But right now the classes were slated till 2020.
Right. Okay. I know you've been trying to ramp it up as quickly as your very thin staffing allows. I listened very attentively to the very heartbreaking stories I heard from many members of the community who have, but I don't think there's any fair way to characterize when someone has lost their child. And I want everyone to know that we're listening, and that while all of us would like to reverse time and somehow or another change whatever circumstances led to the tragedy, we are all, every one of us, in some way limited in terms of what we can know and not know about each incident. And so we have to rely as much as possible on those who can provide us information. And that information is far from perfect, we know. I'm grateful that this department was very aggressive in being one of the first in the country to deploy body-worn cameras. That is a tool that will help us know more and improve faster. And I'm grateful that the chief and department were aggressive in doing that. I also want to observe, you know, as I look at this report, fundamentally, the complaints are down and discipline is up. And we can all say that there are failures in every organization, and this police department is no different, but fundamentally, this is a department that is holding itself more accountable. And this is a department that is striving to improve. And I think the data that I'm seeing broadly tells me that. That doesn't mean there's not plenty of other room for improvement, but I am appreciative of the efforts that all are making, and I'm appreciative of the effort of the IPA as well to encourage and spur that improvement. I do appreciate also, Aaron, the framework that you put this report into. I think it is much more usable than in past years in terms of being accessible and focused on issues that really matter the most, I think, to the community and to us, about use of force and issues of race and so forth. I think it's very well organized and presented. It is clear that we've got a real challenge out on the street in terms of the interface of the police department and those with mental health episodes. And we have a fundamental problem in this community. And I know this is not the only community in which that's a problem, but the problem is one in which someone who's experiencing a mental health episode is encountering, as the first person there to help, somebody with a gun and a badge. And that's not good for anybody. And it's certainly not good for the individual who's suffering that mental health episode. And I know the cops don't like it that way either. And I know, Chief, you've been trying for some time to get the county to provide you with some mental health experts or mental health treatment providers who can ride along with patrol officers who might respond to these types of calls. I just want to know what's the progress in that conversation with the county?
It's been a positive conversation. We got together last year and spoke to Tony Tullius from Behavioral Health. I know they're planning to, and I agree with you 100%, Mayor. You know, we talked about it earlier. There's been some conversation even with the media with regards to if someone's suffering a medical crisis, they get they get an ambulance, medical treatment. Someone's suffering from a mental crisis, they get a police officer. The goal really is to have, quote, quasi-ambulances to deal with mental health. Right. That's really the reality. And what you mentioned is the ultimate goal that I'd like to do in this police department. But for right now, the mobile mental health is what we're trying to get up and running with the county, and to have actual clinicians out on the streets to be able to respond, to assist officers, out in the field. And there's a meeting that's being scheduled. Things could be happening a little bit quicker, but as the county, the civil grand jury's report came out, the reality of it is as well is that, there's a lack of clinicians also that they're trying to recruit to help. And so that's an area that I think we need to work on. I know the grand jury gave some recommendations on that, but there's certainly a willingness. I'm not getting a sense that there's a defiance or a dragging of the feet. I think people understand that we need to get that help out there. We just really need to get it out there as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Well, as I think about, partners like the Community Foundation that have been working on improving trust in the community with police, I'd be more than happy to start pitching, see how we can get the resources to start getting that mental health, those professionals on board. Because, I just had this meeting with superintendents throughout the city. As you know, we've got 19 school districts with 19 superintendents. And I can tell you, we go through hours of meetings with this group of folks about all kinds of educational issues. And the one issue where it is the hot button is the fact that when there's somebody in mental health crisis, a student in mental health crisis, they have to shut a school down for 3 hours and they can't get anybody from the county to show up to help. And so this is affecting all dimensions of our community right now. And certainly we see the most tragic episodes. People are losing their family members. But we know this is impairing our schools. It's affecting everyone. And we've just got to find a way through this. And it seems to me, as we think about city-county meetings that may be coming up, I would certainly be happy to prioritize this as the topic. Because it's affecting how we interact with homeless individuals on the street. We know that's another issue of ours. We just need more mental health professionals out there. So anyway, I look forward to continuing this conversation offline and other forums. The one concern I had is illustrated on page 19 of the IPA's report. It had to do with the standards for intervention counseling, which I think it's like you got to have 5 complaints in a year. Have we ever had anybody subjected to intervention counseling?
Often.
Yeah. Often?
Yes.
Okay, because from the reports, it looked like there were only 2 officers in the last 5 years that have had at least 5 complaints in a year. At least, I don't know if it's your slide or Aaron's. Can't remember.
I didn't have any slides.
Okay, it was Aaron's slide. Is that right? There were just 2 in the last 5 years?
So Lieutenant Matchett or the chief can speak certainly more to this. The standard for EIS is 5 complaints in a 12-month period. So there may be officers that have that number of complaints in a 12-month period, even if they don't all show up in the same calendar year.
Oh, I got you. Okay. But it sounds like it's pretty rare, because you can also, if any of those complaints are unfounded, then that doesn't count against your score, so to speak. And so I'm just wondering, do we have any sense, or are many officers actually getting this intervention counseling? And, should we be, moving the bar a bit so maybe more folks would get access?
Well, Mayor, and I'll let Lieutenant Matchett speak, but we do them often. And just to clarify, it's 5 complaints of any type or 3 of the same.
Right.
And we do it very often. I think Lieutenant Matchett does them all the time, because I see him in the morning coming in early to do them. So please.
Yeah, hi. As a matter of fact, I conducted 3 early intervention counselings in the last 2 weeks.
Okay.
And many more beyond the last 2 weeks.
Okay, that sounds like what we ought to be doing, which is great. It just doesn't seem to correspond with the data, so I guess we can figure that out offline.
Can I just interject one thing? So there's a number of topics. I mean, you've touched on the mobile crisis teams and the county relationship. That's one example. It's a huge example. It's arguably the biggest example. And the EIS, the early intervention system, is another one where these are conversations that my office that I've had with Chief Garcia and with respect to EIS with Lieutenant Matchett. And because I know there's common ground between us and the police department about going in that direction, making improvements to the early intervention system, for example, because it is a very basic system and there are very sophisticated systems out there. But this is something we've talked about, and I've gotten assurances that for now, I trust and have no reason not to trust that this will be something that they want to improve on. So I don't have recommendations on this right now because I know this is. I don't want to pick on them if I know that they're really trying to get there.
Yeah.
Same thing on the mobile crisis teams. That is one of the first things I spoke with the chief about when I took this job. As you know, I was involved with some review of the jail before I took this job and had learned a lot about the challenges around mental health in the county and have a background on investigating other systems in terms of mental health. And it was just a huge issue. But it's an area where I know the chief is having all those conversations, and it's a goal. So I just want to make sure I commend the chief for heading in that direction on those two issues and others. We don't have space in the report to address all of those areas where things are moving in the right direction, and certainly we're watching to make sure they do move eventually, and before too long. But the early intervention system, I don't have the statistics. I think it'd be an interesting thing to receive from PD if we're not getting that some way. But it is a basic system that probably does need some revision.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. And then, Chief, the annual use of force report. When's that likely to come forward?
We're going to be working on that. Hopefully, we should have it within the next couple months. Yeah. The next couple months. We'll have it on 2017. It's unclear why they haven't been done since 2015, but we're going to get right on them.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Without a doubt.
Councilmember Rennes.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I just want to thank the families and the advocates for coming out and sharing your stories with us. Well, not your stories, but your experiences. I think it becomes really difficult to hear so much loss, right? And maybe that's the reason why the lights aren't lighting up over the speaker request to speak. Because we understand that as a woman of color, I get it. My husband, if he drives by himself, wears the wrong kind of hat, he'll be targeted, right? I live another experience. But with that, and I appreciate some of those folks who've brought up being cognizant of that. And one thing I do know is that our chief of police also recognizes this, and he commands with that in mind, because he himself is also a person of color, and is very sensitive to that. So I wanted to, first of all, just thank you. Thank you for giving us that very human side of this. Because when we see policies, we think of things that are not working, things that are working. But these are your life experiences. And you've taught me to see what this policy would work with your situation in mind. So one of the things that I actually really appreciate is the emphasis that you all have on mental health awareness training and the CIT, and I'm on the public, the PISFIS, public safety, and I forget the rest of it because that's the most important one. It's a finance and strategic committee. And we get to talk about this a little bit more. And so we see the chief and we see the deputy chief And we get to talk a little bit more about what's happening in terms of, sharing the numbers and giving us updates. And one of the things that I have seen is, Chief, you've been always very receptive when I think our Vice Mayor brought up the issue about domestic violence, and you really stood up and you recognized that not only do we need to look at this systemically or in terms of a policy, but this is also a responsibility as a man and a father, and certainly as a chief of police. So I appreciate that you don't stick to just policy, right? And so I have a lot of hope for this change, and I think that when our Councilmember Perales was talking about understanding, I think this is when we can talk about these very difficult topics, that we create this level of understanding with one another so that we can create some change. And that's what I hope that we can do when we're talking about this IPA report and what it creates for us. So I wanted to give you a little bit about my perspective on community policing, because I started with Project Crackdown. Certainly that was more than 20 years ago. That was with the city of San Jose. And one of the key partners was always the police department. Because if we didn't have the police department as really as a partner, taking out gang members or reducing, the drugs or getting rid of the blight, it just didn't work because we couldn't do it ourselves, right? We just couldn't. And I'm really happy that at this point we don't call it Project Crackdown, we call it Project Hope, because that's what this creates, this kind of partnership, interdisciplinary partnership that we have with the police department and code enforcement and crime prevention. And for me, that was the first introduction to community policing. And I just thought it was top-notch. It is a model that is very expensive to have, but we've managed to replicate it in many different areas. I know our captains, my captain in our Welch neighborhood and our Meadow Fair neighborhood, they're basically replicating that framework, right, of community policing. So it's not just showing up at events, but really creating partners with our community. So I'm glad that we have more than what I think is stated in this report, because it can mean a lot of things. So I appreciate that there is that ability to apply community policing based on the needs of that community. So I'm going to switch my train of thought to sexual assault. And I really liked those two recommendations that you have about having body-worn cameras during investigations, interviews with a survivor, as well as making sure that we have some privacy for that survivor to be able to recount what happened. So on there, one thing that I want you to clarify, Chief, is it says this procedural manual will be modified to contain the word shall, and so I love that, and will incorporate the use of on-call sexual assault investigators when practical. But I want to know what does practical mean? And, to further define it, because I'm not sure if sexual assault investigators are on call, how many do we have? Because if we say if it's practical and we don't have very many, then it'll likely never really be practical, right? So, and I wanted to know, how often do they actually take interviews? So do sexual assault investigators typically take interviews with survivors, or how, if you can walk me through that a little bit more so I can understand.
No, they take interviews with survivors.
And would you be able to say 80% of the time, 50% of the time? Just gauge it a little bit for me.
A majority of the time.
The majority of the time.
That they'd interview survivors. And when you say practical, council member, practical, we do have on-call sexual assault investigators. They're on call 24/7. So practical would mean really, unless there's an emergency or other unforeseen issues, is usually what practical, would entail. But we do have on-call sexual assault investigators.
Okay, good. So maybe if you could use that language instead, because I see now what you mean by practical. But if you can use that language and replace it with the word practical, because I'm not a police officer and I don't have the advantage of maybe Raul or others who've been in this culture, and typically that's what it would mean to you. That's your frame of reference, but it isn't mine. So if you wouldn't mind to maybe
Defining practical?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think you said the use of a sexual assault investigator as an interviewer.
Yes, then we would define practical, because it would obviously, unless there's emergency circumstances, if they're available. If they're not handling another case. There are times if they're available, then I would agree that we should use them, especially when they're on call. If they're not available because they're interviewing someone else, then sometimes the officer doesn't have a choice but to do the interview themselves.
Okay. So when the officer does that interview, I guess that takes me back to that CIT, because I was trying to think, if not everybody is trained just yet, how do we interview survivors with a trauma-informed, in a trauma-informed manner? And I don't blame the officer at all, because I think, and I was thinking back when I was at First 5, and I don't know if you remember this, Vice Mayor, but we were training therapists so that they could have this specialty in early childhood for mental health. And we were asked also to do the early childhood mental health certificate and take the classes, and and it was kind of a burdensome, it was a little bit of a burden, because one, we weren't the therapists providing the services, but it allowed us to understand what it is that we're asking the therapist to be trained on. And so if we're asking officers to do these interviews, I don't know what kind of training, if they haven't done the CIT, or if the CIT actually fulfills that or builds that ability for that officer to actually be trauma-informed and have that kind of engagement.
Well, Councilmember, in the academy, they get training on how to handle sexual assault investigations. When they graduate the academy, when they do get CIT, they get procedural justice, they get other tools that officers then all put together in order to be able to conduct a thorough and thoughtful investigation. We are fortunate that although we are rebuilding, we're in a large department. There are other smaller departments whose officers in the field are the only ones doing interviews that don't have the luxury of having on-call sexual assault investigators. And so there's definitely the officers. I have all the confidence in the world that an officer in the field can conduct a good interview of a survivor.
I'm not doubting that they can. It's just the quality of that interview, right? So somebody who's more trauma-informed wouldn't ask somebody to retell a story 3-4 times. I don't know what the best practices are for a trauma-informed interview, so I can't really tell you what I'm looking for. I know what they are when you interview a family and when you interview a child, but I don't know what they are for a survivor, or a survivor of sexual assault or a survivor of domestic violence. I don't know what those are. I know that you're training your officers to take those interviews. I don't doubt that that's part of the training. I just don't know if those are trauma informed.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that question, Councilmember. I mean, I know the officers are getting their training. I know it's certified training.
Yeah, so that tells me it isn't trauma-informed training. It leads me to believe that it's not trauma-informed training, which is what I'm concerned about when we talk about crimes against women, sexual crimes and physical crimes. And I'm not sure how we can address having officers be more trauma-informed when we're engaging with these survivors. I have additional questions. So as I look into my additional questions, maybe somebody else can go and
Okay.
come back
Sure,
to me,
we can come
please.
back to you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Nguyen?
Thank you, Mayor. I have two things. First of all, I really appreciate all the community members and leaders who came out and talked. I really share your story because I'm here because of that. 15 years ago, I remember that day, July 13, 2003, a 25 years old young Vietnamese, tiny. She's weighs only 90 pounds and she was 4'9" in her kitchen. She spoke no English. Her husband called for service. Two police officers came, reported to the house. Within 10 seconds, they were shot and she was killed. It was later found out she was holding a fruit peeler. The report was a meat cleaver. So the service for police call turned out to be a tragedy. That was 15 years ago. 2 days later, from that day, I was the one who organized the march from that home on Ted Taylor and 12th Street to the city department with a young Vietnamese leader who later became the councilwoman, Madison Nguyen. But on that time, I was, of course, lost of words and emotion to describe what happened. But this thought changed my life, that I no longer being just ignorant or non-participating from city, but I turned my attention and energy toward learning and engaging more. And at the time, I remember I worked with the Officer Phan No, later became Assistant Chief. But at the time, I remember Chief Lansdowne started the program of engaging community. And I started seeing changes. For the first time, I saw the police really went out their way to engage with community and learn. And at the time, I believe, in fact, I remember I called a conference with the television, explained to them the huge difference in the culture of the Asian people. Vietnamese people use a fruit peeler, a large fruit peeler. I bought one item from the market and demonstrated to television. And within the two days, the media changed. They dropped the word meat cleaver into the right word of fruit peeler. So it started a long and painful process of working with the department to change the culture, to change the perception, and to increase the dynamics between engagement between the department with the community. And I must say, even though the shooting is still painful, and I understood that city cost tons of money to the family, that family, many families thereafter. Believe me, we share the frustration in our meeting all the time, and every time we hear about it, our hearts just sink. It's become a burden to the city, now we know, but also the great loss to the family. But what I meant to say is, yes, things happen, bad things happen sometimes regardless of good intent. The important thing, how do we engage in dealing with it and improve it? So a lot of way could have been done, but two things I think important that have been done. One is the CIT training of the officers, of the cultural and language competency, and especially of the mental health. But one thing I must say, I've been praying, I'm so glad that this thing happened, was the body-worn camera. And therefore, now it comes to this point, I'm thankful. I'm still holding my breath, that I think we're just starting out with this very new information. I remember the department got a grant and we started, and that took a while. I'm glad that we started. So I'm still struggling every day that someday in the future we will have a much better dialogue and result out of the effort today, the effort of we standing up, effort of we speaking out, the effort of the IPA and the police officers and their department of doing things. So I have a couple questions for the, one for the IBA first. The question is, do you find, or do you think it may be too early, but that in the future when you have enough data, that do you find the impact or improvement, the hope of improvement from the use of force of police shooting by the using of the body-worn camera?
Thank you, Councilmember. So the question is whether the body-worn camera has an effect on officer-involved shootings, or whether it allows us to understand officer-involved.
The first question, was, I don't know whether we have enough data yet, but I would like to hear from you.
Right. That's a great question. I know there have been some conflicting studies and reports elsewhere about the effect of body-worn cameras on officer behavior, particularly as it relates to use of force, which would include, of course, officer-involved shootings. So I think, like I said, there's been a couple conflicting reports about this. And so that's all I really have to go on. I think I would like to think that when everybody when there's more transparency around these incidents, that everybody can learn about how to avoid these kinds of incidents. I know in our own city, that's a big part of when the police department conducts their shooting review panels. A big part of that review session, which we participate in, is a presentation of the various body-worn camera footages that are available from the incident. And what's supposed to come out of those sessions, and what does come out of those sessions routinely, is some recommendations from the police department based on what they learned from the body-worn camera and other information, about how to prevent those shootings, whether it's an equipment need or a training need for all the officers. And so the hope is not necessarily that it would change officer behavior, but that it would change how we prepare our officers to use other tools and equip them with other tools so that they can avoid, if at all possible, using their firearm.
I agree, and I find this very important and sensitive and difficult subject. And I also understand this is still new to us, and you might not even have enough data yet. But I think when we have you on board, that's one of the things we're looking at is looking at the long term ahead. And I would want to share with you that this is what is my top concern, that we will support you to collect that data. And you will, with time, with enough data, you will give us the full meaning and the value, or anything like the outcome will be of the body-worn camera. From my own experiences, when I realized that, hey, I be videotaped, I put on my best behavior, right? And we've seen videos anywhere, YouTube and so and Facebook. But that's just anecdotal, and we don't have the scientific data, so we rely on professionals like you to really assemble and analyze the data. We just started a conversation. That's what I'm saying. We're looking for more.
I'll just say one other quick response. we receive the body-worn camera footage for all of the complaints, all the incidents that are subjects of complaints. And so, for example, as was discussed earlier, we received 33 force complaints in 2017, and we would receive the associated body-worn camera footage from those incidents. So that's a small percentage of all the force incidents, but it's some meaningful number of incidents, and we absolutely do learn things from our review of those incidents, both singular incidents and when you look at them sort of in the aggregate. And we are right now in the process of developing policy recommendations related to not only the use of force, but the use of the firearm. And so, and we'll certainly have that information in the coming months, but we learn a lot from reviewing the cases overall, but in particular, the body-worn camera footage. And to your point, though, certainly the more of those body-worn camera footage that we can access, even if they're not related to a particular complaint, the more we can learn. And so right now we are limited to where there's been a complaint or where we participate in the officer-involved shooting review panels.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to, in the future, to support you more in this approach and learning of this value of data. Now let me turn to the chief, and I have a question, one major question on that. I was explained, and we learned before, that it's really not easy just to turn on the body-worn camera all the time, because sometimes you got to turn it off for security, safety, or sensitive reason. But the fact that we rely on that this practice to be in place as required when the officers supposed to have the camera turned on, but sometimes they turn off. So my question to you is, what is your policy or safeguard to make sure it's being properly used when they're on, when they should be on? And any disciplinary or remedial action, if any, for violations?
Council members, we hold our officers accountable for use of the body-worn camera, and it's per policy. I mean, every enforcement action, they need to have it. They need to activate it, and when they don't activate it, and we know about it, they get disciplined for it. I think right now there's nine in 2017. Nine in 2017 that were sustained for not turning it on. So, we hold them accountable for it. Made it clear to the rank and file after the novelty of the turning the camera started on and off. In addition to that, one thing we did from a training perspective, because as human beings, you have to get used to something, is now we give it to all our academy recruits, so that our academy recruits in the academy also start making it a muscle memory about turning on the body-worn camera.
So we have been using the camera for about a year and a half now, is that right?
Just about, yes.
Right. Did you find them to be useful in terms of improving the performance, the interaction, or the report of the violence case at all?
They've been extremely useful on many different levels. I've also heard from certain attorneys that it's helped on cases as well, and so it's been extremely helpful for us, not only in sustaining allegations against our officers, but also exonerating allegations against our officers. So it's been an incredible tool. There are examples after example that I like to show the officers with regards to the benefits of having the camera. And so, but again, back to your original point, we absolutely hold a standard on the body-worn cameras to be turned on for enforcement actions, and we hold officers accountable when they don't.
I really appreciate, and I thank you for your very encouraging and very honest and sincere answer. I think that would give the community a big confidence boost in the department and your leadership. And And I must say, out of all the story I heard, I'm still very concerned, and we keep an eye on it. We keep working at it. But from my own personal experience of 38 years living in San Jose, I must admit that I hadn't. I don't remember a bad experience of interaction. I don't mean to be using big words, but I really had all very positive interaction with the officers. Personally, when I got a ticket, the officer very professional, very courteous, and I thank one officer for giving a ticket, makes to remind me of being safe, up our safety, to that effect. But let me tell you just one incident that one in my professional workup doing a domestic case argument with a lady officer, the Asian lady officer, by the way. She's absolutely cool. She went there, she spoke the language, and she called out the husband and the wife in the right term, which is uncle and aunt, in the cultural, competent way. That put them in the family position right away. And that wake them up from the heated argument into a realize, hey, we're family. And she was able to calm them down in minutes. And she diffused the situation and really brought peace to that family in front of my eyes. I really commend and appreciate the training and that lady officer. And I think we're on the right track. With this, with all the community standing up and keep an eye on you guys, and with the IPA, I think we have the tool to do a great service to the community and also for your own officers. So I commend you, thank you, and you make sure you understand we have all our support for all the tool, equipment, and every other way too. So thank you, Chief. Thank you, the IPA.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Councilmember Ennis.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm just going to go back to what I was talking about for the for the trauma-informed interviewing skills. And so I was thinking about what you had said earlier, Chief, with the mobile mental health unit that you're working with the county to get that up and going. And I realized that there's not enough counselors or therapists out there. And one of the reasons why is it's so expensive to live here. That's one of the things that actually happened for First Five when they were looking for specialized therapists for children. They weren't here. There was such a holdup in the system for therapists in general. So I really get that, and I really like that you're working with the county, who is very avant-garde and it works in the latest evidence-based models for mental health. And so I was thinking in the same way that we offer and de-escalate and respond to folks with mental health crises, in that same spirit that we would be also responding to survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault in the same way, because they're also having a mental health crisis. We might not have a mobile health crisis unit go out there, but they're having a crisis. And so I would really like for you to consider having maybe some trauma-informed interviewing skills that are built into the training, and that maybe the initial training, so that it's not a training that has to be added on, but right from the get-go, people get that.
Councilmember, let me just research that. I mean, that's certainly one of the benefits that we have oftentimes is in the field training program. Now, we do have a little bit of time with our recruits outside of the academy to train on additional things, similar to how we train with procedural justice or crisis intervention and things of that nature. And let me just let us take it back to see what that would entail, how many additional hours that would entail to maybe implement that the right way and actually frankly do it in the academy.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. That is it for me. I realized I didn't have additional questions. I thought I did. But one of the things I wanted to actually thank you, Chief, is that you pointed out that the use of force cases had really stayed the same. They were around 600, I think, in 2016 and then 2017, more or less. I don't have the exact number. I think you said 637 in 2016 and 217 and 629. And I see that as an improvement because the cases are still the same, but the complaints are less. And so I do see that as real progress from the police department. I see that directly connected with you and your leadership and all that you're doing for San Jose and for our police department. So thank you so much for your leadership. And Aaron, thank you so much for the report. I know sometimes these are tough conversations, but these are conversations we need to have, right? So we can grow and we can gain that understanding. So thank you.
Councilmember Jimenez.
Thank you. I'm not going to be very long. The first thing I'd like to do is move approval of the report because I think that's what's been lacking in a lot of the things. Sure, everybody was done, and there is a second. So then I just have a few comments and a question. You know, I think it's no surprise to anyone in this room that many of us have met both publicly and privately with a lot of the folks that do outreach to a lot of us, folks from PACT and a host of other places. And so one of the things I know that's come up a few times, and I'm wondering if Chief, both you and maybe Aaron can touch on this, is sometimes we get asked sort of, well, the benefits of maybe getting access to additional information, whether it be body-worn cameras of folks out not necessarily tied to some sort of complaint. And I'm just wondering if you could just touch on that publicly, whether you see value in that, how that would even happen. I don't know if there's restrictions. It seems to me that maybe police officers' Bill of Rights and a host of other things, I think. So I'm wondering if you could touch on that.
Sure, thanks, Councilmember. So we do have a section in our report on the scope of independent oversight where a lot of what we do in that chapter is sort of memorialize the discussions from the community and at the study session in January, which occurred after the reporting period for this report, but was worth highlighting because it was the culmination of a number of other discussions. I was asked at that study session by the gentleman sitting to your left about what my opinion was as to what makes for sort of the most effective form of oversight in terms of access and whatnot. And so we memorialize in the report my response to that question. And so the short response to that, I would just reiterate what I said there and what we summarize in the report, which is that, and we brought the two gentlemen in from the other oversight agencies, Denver and BART, who are traditional IPA models to a large extent, but have additional access authority to a large cache of incidents that are not connected to incidents that were the subject of a citizen complaint. And so I draw on those models and also from my own experience where in other contexts I've had full access to all the incidents so that we can do a fuller analysis. The best example of this is where we only have access to use of force, for example. We really can't look at how often police were able to avoid using force. We can only look at those incidents where force was used. And so we can't look at all the de-escalation issues and other tactics. And so I think we would obviously with a small staff of 6 and other responsibilities, we would be inherently limited in what we could do with all that, all those records. And so I see sort of natural limits on us sort of, over-exploiting that information or, but at the same time, it would allow us to sit down and have a fuller discussion with SJPD about what the data means and what are some of the factors that create some of the, initial areas of concern, but may explain disparities or initial red flags. Obviously, would let us highlight other issues. We could do an audit on, for example, on different topics. We could choose a topic and say we're going to do a review of a sample of records or incidents, including a review of body-worn camera footage and officer reports and so on. So, this report is structured along sort of systems or issues, and in order to really delve into the issues as much as maybe I would like or others would like, in this way, I think getting greater access would allow us to flesh out a lot of these issues a great deal more.
Thank you, Aaron. Chief, I don't know if there's any, because I'm sure you've heard this question come up as well, right? Just from the community and folks, or maybe not, I don't know.
No, I've heard it many times, and my answer is always the same.
So please.
We explained it during the study session as well. Again, procedural justice needs to occur inside an organization as well as outside. If officers don't feel they're being treated fairly, there are some negative aspects to that. My officers expect things to be looked at completely, thorough, and fairly and objective. And if they aren't done in that fashion, then there could have to be some negative ramifications that none of us want to see. Right. Certainly there are some agreements. I think if we stayed in the use of force realm, and we've had these discussions before when it comes to aggregate data with regards to patterns and practices of use of force as a whole. I think that's something that we can work on. But, when we talk about how many times we don't use force, I mean, those are numbers we do have. We responded to over 315,000 calls for service approximately last year. We arrested approximately 15 to 17,000 individuals last year and used force a little over 600 times. I'm not a mathematician, so I can't do the percentages for you, but I can tell you that they're not very high. So our officers are not using force a very high percentage of the time. But certainly with regards to allowing access from 64,000 foot level with regards to patterns and practice use of force, that's an area that we've been willing to discuss.
Okay, all right, thank you. And for those from the community that are left, I should have obviously thanked you before many folks have left already. But I just state my general opinion of sometimes, obviously hearing some of the gut wrenching stuff up here. Folks sharing their stories and concerns. I often think that the reality and the real state of our department, I think, is, and I think anyone here would acknowledge, there's always things we can improve on, but to suggest that we're like in this disarray and we're falling apart, we're one of the worst departments, anything like that is just not real to me. And I think sometimes we as a community, if we continuously shout out that things are this bad on one end of the spectrum, we sort of lose a little bit credibility, right? But I also wouldn't say that things are perfect either, because we hear, just time and again, in closed session, things like that where things aren't exactly where they should be. And I think we can all acknowledge that. And so I think I appreciate the fact that we seemingly have a department, and you, Chief, that seems to me to have shown a willingness to change, to grow, to get better. And I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you, Aaron, that that your willingness to ask the tough questions, right? Your willingness to state things very publicly. And I think we need both of you. And for me, it's interesting up here and seeing both of you present and seeing sort of this inherent tension, for lack of a better word, right? I think that's healthy, right? I think it's, and me and another council member were talking about it, is that I'm not sure if we're ever going to have an IPA in which the police department is going to love and have dinner with, and you're going to invite them over for drinks and know each other's families. I'm not sure that's ever going to happen. And I'm okay with that, because I think there's going to be inherent tension, and I think that could potentially, and I'd like to think it will lead to good results for everyone involved, the community, as well as you, Chief, and you, Aaron. So I just want to say thank you for putting up with all these questions. Hopefully no one else has. Well, I see Councilmember Diep with some questions, but so I think the motion's on the floor, right?
Yeah, just to clarify, is that as to both reports, both the DII and the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Diep?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I just wanted to thank the speakers who are no longer here, but if we could relay that to them for coming to share your experiences. It was important for me to hear that. I mean, that was news to me, the things that you went through and experienced. You know, you watch the news and you see things in other cities, Ferguson or wherever else, and you know that's not San Jose. That is not our experience in San Jose at all. But still, things happen that I just think it's important for the council to know, and at least for me personally, I did not know those things happen in San Jose. But to the reports, I had a question for the chief. I think it was in your report, there was a grid or a table with the number of kind of, I guess, infractions or disciplinary actions compared to the years on the force of the police officers. And then you see, like, when you have rookies or 1 to 3 years experience, it's some disciplinary action, and then it kind of curves off. But then once you get to the high end of the more experienced officers, like the seniors, let's say, it kind of goes up again. Could you speak to that?
I'll tell you, with the younger officers, that we have, obviously that's something that I would expect, making sure that the officers that come into the organization and they hold their standards. So I expect that. I've seen from time to time those numbers at the end go, but again, sometimes when officers, those are the late tenured officers, are near the ends of their careers, and these don't necessarily have to be major allegations or what have you, right? But there are corners that are cut. Right. The more experience you have, and when we catch them cutting those corners, we're going to hold them as accountable as we're going to hold the 0 to 3 year rookie. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that's probably the phenomenon that you see with that increase, is that as they get older, they might start cutting some corners that are not acceptable to us.
Sure. Now, I don't know about the acronyms, but is there some sort of training, or was it CITA or whatever you and Councilmember Perales were talking about? Is that kind of the same thing, where if we had that kind of training, it would kind of curb that behavior? Or
no, not necessarily. The CIT is just for interactions with people that are in mental crisis. Okay. So that's a different type of training. But again, like I said earlier, it's a tool in the toolbox. Right. The more tools officers have in their toolbox, the better they're going to be.
So I guess I understand from that previous discussion that we're time strapped, or there are a lot of different trainings and certifications we want our officers to have, and we're still a small force relatively to where we want to be. So we don't want to put all our officers in just constant training. But I guess my question is, knowing that the more seniority you get as an officer, and that's just not as an officer, but just in life, like in anything you do, the more versed and experienced you are, senioritis or whatever kind of kicks in, and you think you can kind of cut these corners. But how do we kind of stop that? Is there like a training? I know as attorneys, we have to do like annual, professional trainings, MCLEs, doctors have to do it, other professions. Is there something that can kind of just remind people of the ethics or the code of conduct of being a police officer, that's not overbearing, not time consuming, but would help prevent that kind of curve, just bend it back a little bit?
Well, two things. One, your officers do go through training. It's called CPT, continual professional training, that they go through on a yearly basis. And so there's certain courses that we could put in there. Several years ago, actually, I actually was the one that gave it. I gave an ethics class, actually, as a captain to the entire police department. So we've done those things from time to time. We do discipline in the police department to correct behavior and set a standard for the entire organization. So whether you have 1 month on out of the FTO program, or you are in your 29th year and you're about to retire, there's a standard that's set, that the expectations that every officer knows, what the expectation is. But certainly it's something that from time to time, we certainly, could look at things from a CPT perspective, to have some refresher courses. We put our officers that go to CPT, or not necessarily, there's a mixture. And sometimes that's really healthy to have, some veteran officers with younger officers. But again, those are just my thoughts on that.
Thank you. I had a question about the citizens complaint versus the department-initiated complaints. I mean, I understand under the system now, if it's a citizen complaint, then for some reason it's public realm and the IPA can just follow it and audit it. If it's department-initiated, it's not available to the IPA under the current regime we have. I get the kind of the personnel issue. Officers Bill of Rights and whatnot. But I guess, is there also, I sense, and this could just be my impression, but I sense there's a bit of a separation, like in terms of how we consider the citizens' complaints versus the department initiated. And, you know, as a council member and I go out and I deal with my community, sometimes there's just wild things that are said that are just baseless, right? And I have to tamp down the rumor, I have to address it, and it becomes like this whole issue for me in my district or any one of our districts. Is there a little bit of that in terms of the citizen complaints and the department initiated? So do we feel that, you know, because it's a citizen complaint, then maybe it's doesn't carry as much weight coming from, say, an officer who knows the handbook and knows the rules and like has been through all the trainings? Is there a bit of distinction between those two?
No, not necessarily, Councilmember. We treat them very seriously on both spectrums. But you know, when we're out in the community, I'm not, you know, all the community work that I've done, you know, one of the issues that we get is the ability to police our own, quite frankly, which is when we have these conversations, especially with our DII report that we do, it's that ability to be able to say, listen, look, you know, we do discipline our own. These are the, you know, this is what we do. But again, that's another realm that we're open to having conversations discussing about allowing the IPA's office to have oversight over DIIs. That's another arena, so that we're all out there and we're able to have that conversation about us being able to discipline our own.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and thank you. And then just lastly, I think Robert Aguirre raised a point when he was making public comment, and it just made me think. His point about when there's a body or on camera footage and the officer is writing his report, to not allow access to the footage so you can kind of correlate what your report is to what the videotape says. Do you have an opinion either way about that? I mean, it makes sense to me, but I don't know the other side of that.
Well, you know, when officers are involved in officer-involved shootings, we don't allow them to review the body-worn camera footage before they give their interview. But for other situations, we do. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not. We don't operate under the premise that that every officer, you know, is trying to match the report with their video. I mean, the video is what it is. Sure. You know, and even before body-worn camera footage, if there was evidence of something, officers would be able to refresh their recollections while writing these reports by utilizing that video. Mm-hmm. But we definitely have seen the distinction, to Robert's point, when it comes to officer-involved shooting, which is why we don't allow them to view it before an officer-involved shooting. But they can review it up to that point.
So what is the distinction then? Is it just the gravity of the incident? Or because if the logic holds that, like, you know, if there's an officer-involved shooting, it's off limits, but if it's just, I don't know, like trespassing, then it's not. What is the rationale for that?
Now, you know, one of the rationales for officer-involved shooting, it's a traumatic incident for everyone that's involved. And really, it's best to get the officer's state of mind that they were at that time without allowing him to view something. Just to say, what is it that they saw? Oftentimes you see these type of situations, they get very narrow scoped in officer-involved shooting and don't remember seeing half the things that are in a video. And we want to get that type of information from how they felt during that incident.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, Chief. And thank you, Aaron, for the new format of the report. It was easier to flip through this year. Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you. And I'm going to try and not be very redundant. First of all, I know that just about everybody has left and it's getting late. And I just wanted to thank all those that did come earlier and have the courage to share with us their very, very personal stories. I've heard some of them. Every time that I hear them, I hear something different. And so it's, for those who have remained, if you can convey the message that, no matter how many times we hear it, it's okay to continue sharing it with us. Because, like I said, I hear something different. And I think it's good for us to hear it. And as a mother of 4, I don't ever want to be put in that position, ever. I want to have to be in front of a microphone to share a story like that. So just a couple of things that I want to share. I want to thank both our IPA, and I also want to thank the police department for both reports. I've worked with both of you and have had conversations. I, of course, have a lot more contact and more of a relationship with our police department because they come out and they interact with our community. And when I call upon you, you come to our pizza and our very popular pizza and policy events. They're sought after and well attended. And but I appreciate always the interaction. And I say that with a great deal of gratitude because if I haven't thanked you, I want to be able to thank you today because I know that these stories are really difficult to hear. And I know that they're difficult to hear for you as well because you're not robots and you're not made out of stone. You're made out of heart and soul, and your fathers as well and mothers. So for all of us, these are difficult stories. And I think we want to find a solution. We want to find a way of how we resolve these issues that are happening. And I don't think that there's ever perfect solutions. So are there issues? We have to figure out how we resolve these issues. There are some issues. So I want to ask you, Chief, about a couple of things. And so you heard Councilmember Arenas mention a couple of things about trauma-informed. And at PISFIS last week, where Councilmember Raul Perales is the chair, this comes up over and over, and maybe it's because Councilmember Arenas and I come from that first five world where we recognize that there's this little window of opportunity when we have those teeny weeny little human beings in our care, and if we miss that window of opportunity, it's so difficult to recapture it and get those synapses working again. So that we can give them a fighting chance, that design their future or the rest of their lives, right? And give them a fighting chance. And then we see all the other stuff that we have to kind of catch up on. So I think that's why Councilmember Arenas is kind of like driving the point about being trauma-informed, because we've seen our fair share of it in the courts when we were working in the courts that dealt with domestic violence under Judge Chapman. And then when we were working with families with physicians, catching some really grave conditions that even doctors were not informed. Doctors who had children and who had 8 to 15 years of medical expertise and specialty training, they weren't catching it. And yet Councilmember Arenas and I were in there to catch some of these conditions because we were trained to catch that, right? So when I look at the report that was generated by our IPA and his team, there's just a couple of things that do concern me. One is on page 58. On page 58, the DV complaints are going up. And Mr. IPA, if you could just talk to me a little bit about those numbers going up and what the significance is so that we can put this to rest or find a solution for it. Because I know that this is also connected to page 77, which is a new category, neglect of duty. And I want you to help me connect the dots between one and the other.
Sure. So and I might have Siobhan weigh in if she can on this, because her tenure at the office goes back a ways longer than mine. But just first of all, the tracking whether it arose from a domestic violence incident doesn't specifically have a relationship with whether it's designated as a neglect of duty case. And it may not be a neglect of duty case. It may be a force case that arose from a domestic violence incident, and they're trying to contain the situation to end up using force, or unlawful arrest may be the allegation again. So it could be any number of issues. We just to go back to something the chief said earlier, just as a point of clarification, we track that as we're closing the case, not as it comes in. So we can only report on closed cases, not intakes that arise from domestic violence. So that just addresses one of the statistical observations the chief had earlier in the evening. With respect to neglect of duty, we are transitioning to we have transitioned to a different approach in terms of how do we categorize those allegations that come in that fit that description. Those will include cases where the complaint is that the officer failed to properly respond to a domestic violence incident, either didn't respond to the call, didn't conduct a proper investigation, didn't make a mandatory arrest. Again, those are allegations, and whether they're sustained is a separate question. And so some of the examples we give in the report of case summaries related to domestic violence would conceivably fit into that category, and would, under the new protocol, be called a neglect of duty allegation rather than a procedure allegation. That will facilitate our tracking these cases. We can zero in on those neglect of duty cases and sort of dig more into the domestic violence contours that may exist there. As to your other question about why the numbers have gone up, that would require a great deal of speculation on my part. They're not huge differences. I mean, you see, at least in the last 3 years, certainly there was the spike up from 2014. We haven't talked about this as a team, why that pattern. So I'm going to put Siobhan on the spot and see if she's thought about this herself. But it may be something we need to explore further. I think it's a great question.
Thank you. As Aaron said, we have not looked at this trend recently in terms of the 3-year figures increasing. And thus, I think it'd be premature for me to engage in speculation, but it would be something we could look at and get back to at a later date.
That's fine, and I thank you for that. One of the concerns I have, Chief, is that I see that you have two officers, and there was about 3,300 cases that came in during the fiscal year, which is a huge number for 2 officers. At least from my perspective, it seems like a lot. I don't know if that's like for your department that's a normal or a fair amount. I know that they're carrying about 140 cases per caseload. So if you can speak to that.
Yeah, Councilmember, I'll tell you, all our investigators have a lot of cases.
Is that an average?
I don't know particularly what the average is, but I know we assigned more cases overall in the Bureau of Investigations last year than we did the year before without adding staff. I'll tell you that we are going to be dedicating staff to family violence to increase those numbers. We are doing that. But again, as I mentioned at the budget hearing when we were here, we're going to add to them as well as we have to add to other units as well. Sexual assaults is carrying a very high caseload as well, a robbery unit. So we're going to add to everything, but we are committing resources to family violence.
And that's great. That's great to hear. And I know that we've been really looking at all of that. And I think that this is an ongoing conversation that for me, it's been something that's been very important for me, especially this past year. There's been several incidents that have happened. I mean, in such a short amount of time. So we can take this conversation offline and see how we can best support you to make sure that no child goes without their mother due to a tragic incident like this. But I'd like to explore a little bit more on how we can look at how we can support the women or the survivors, not just the women, because it's not just women, but the survivors. And I know that you were working also with the Beatty Foundation or Beatty Foundation to look at some policy changes as well. And so I think that that is going to ensure that our victims are safe, or that we don't have future victims. But I want to address also opportunities for grants, because I see here that there was, and we've talked about some of the losses of grants. And is there a potential of regaining or applying for additional grant money?
Yes, there's a chance of getting additional grant money.
Okay. Which should alleviate that, the fiscal impact. And that's it for me. So I want to thank you again, both departments for the reports. And again, just thank everybody for coming out this evening, and hope to be able to can't alleviate the pain, but hope that we don't add to that club that was here earlier today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Perales.
Thank you. So I just wanted to be able to help out the chief here as well. I know that in regards to some of the questions that were being asked about the domestic violence training, specifically that you don't necessarily make all of these rules, and it was coming to my mind when Councilmember Arenas was talking about it. The Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, and then just the post trainings in general, come down from the state level. And I know I've gotten 2 invites, one actually last week that the entire department got, mandatory domestic violence training. And I wanted to be able to, and I know Councilmember Arenas, I copied her on an email, but we actually have a connection to the commission, which is Reverend Jeff Moore. He is a commissioner. And so I actually already sent out a question to him to see if he could help us answer the question in regards to, is that training trauma informed? And we also have a former Sergeant Soroka, so I messaged him as well, see if maybe they can answer some of that. I actually couldn't find online if it said it was trauma informed or not. My guess would be that it is, but nonetheless, I also wanted to offer to Councilmember Arenas, if you're interested. I'll probably have to sit there for a couple hours doing this training online. You're welcome to review it with me so you can actually see what that training looks like.
I will sit there with you. Absolutely. Thank you so much for reaching out to Reverend Moore. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to just raise one fairly detailed set of questions just about what appears, I think, on page 36 of the IPA report. Let me just read this. It's in a red box and refers to some data that was described on the prior page. And it says, an underlined text, key statistic. White suspects were reportedly more than 2.5 times more likely than Latinos, and 81% more likely than blacks to leave a use of force incident with, quote, no charges, unquote, referred. And then on the prior page, it describes that every white suspect for whom no charges was the most serious charge. This is in a use of force complaint. That every white suspect for whom no charges was the most serious charge went to the hospital, while 7% of Latinos, 17% of blacks, and 20% of Asians went to jail. I guess here's my concern. And when you make assertions like this with bullet points, typically my sense is that means that there's robust data supporting the conclusion, that small variations are not likely to lead to different conclusions. and that we should draw some conclusion from these kinds of assertions that should lead us to take some action. Let me just refer to what's there on the bottom of page 35. As I understand it, what I just heard a couple hours ago when we started was that, well, so of the 43 folks who were involved in a complaint about force and had no charge filed against them, 16 were Caucasian, 15 were Latino, and 6 were African American. Now, none of the Caucasian individuals went to jail. But what I've just learned is that only one of the Latino individuals went to jail and only one of the African American individuals went to jail. And I guess the problem is you're presenting statistics as if somehow or another we should draw an inference from a conclusion, when I know that if there was just any change in any variability of one person in one incident in any of those categories would lead to a completely different conclusion. If you had one white person go to jail, or if that 1 out of 15 Latino individuals didn't go to jail, you'd have a different conclusion that you draw from this data. And so, in other words, it's not terribly robust. And so I guess I'm concerned about the presentation of evidence like this. And I guess it goes a bit to the chief's point. There are problems in every police department, and undoubtedly we've got ours. I still think we've got the best department in the country, and probably the most proactive department in the country when it comes to issues of accountability and responsibility to the community. I'm sure there are more areas where we've got to push, but the problem is that when you present data in this way, I think it has us shooting at the wrong targets. And ultimately, I don't think it enhances the credibility of the work that you're doing, which is very important work. And so I would just encourage you to look carefully at data like this and ask yourself, is this data from which we can really draw a useful conclusion that will serve as the basis of action? Or is this the kind of data where one single incident, given the fact we're dealing with very small numbers, is likely to alter what you present? And if it's the latter, then hey, move on. Let's focus on the big stuff. Because I think anytime you're talking about race, it rises to the top. And I'm concerned that people draw conclusions from stuff like this that are not warranted. And so anyway, I just wanted to raise that. And certainly you're welcome to respond in any way you'd like.
Yeah, and I appreciate the chief bringing it up, and I appreciate giving me the opportunity to respond. I'll try to be brief in my response. I think the criticism is fair. I think the use of statistics rather than or percentages rather than numbers, I can see now that was misleading. I don't know if that was a result of just going through drafts or trying to get something from the dashboard into the report. I take responsibility for some of that decontextualization. We tried. There are a number of disclaimers and sort of framing around in terms of the context around the dashboard and its limitations and the statistics, and so we were trying to provide that context and show that this was preliminary, that we were not trying to draw conclusions. But I have to say, I think we could have been clearer about that, or, as you said, chosen to focus elsewhere. So I don't think excising it altogether is the only option. I think there's still the risk that people zero in on or make inferences from the data, no matter how many disclaimers and how much context you put around it. So I absolutely take your point, and I cannot possibly disagree with the point that when you're talking about this set of issues, it's going to raise people's it's gonna be something people focus on.
Could I just offer, if I could, for a
Yeah.
moment? What would have been perfectly fine is if you just reported the raw data.
Right.
Then everybody could say, okay, one guy went to jail. I mean,
Right. No, that's,
then
and
it
that
speaks for itself.
And that's exactly what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we were putting this together, and since this has been raised, I did go back and look at the data going back to 2015, and the statistics hold up when you go back and look at about twice the number of incidents, 103 incidents instead of 109 instead of 43. Still 100% of whites going to the hospital. But I think what we should have been very clear on is what I was really trying to do with this was to experiment with the dashboard as a member of the public. Say, here's the kinds of things you can learn, and here's the kinds of things you cannot learn. I'd point out, you can't look at race along weapons and injuries and things like that. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation that, and the chief has frankly said, hey, I'm open to rejiggering what's on each of those 3 dashboards so that people can, and I take him at his word. And I think the way it ended up getting framed, particularly given the seriousness of the issue, we weren't clear enough that it was preliminary. I take your point about using the raw numbers rather than the percentages. And I want to say, and this is responsive to something else, both to this and something else the chief said, because I don't want this to undermine either our credibility or a really important message that I try to convey to the chief and to you all, which is that at every opportunity, it is really important to me to sit down with the chief and with his people, and Lieutenant Matchett can attest to it. We're talking all the time. I sat down with the CIT unit. I sat down with the command staff on domestic violence. I sat down with the captain responsible for crime prevention community policing. We sat down with the crime prevention supervisor. We tour EPS. We tour shelters and encampments. We try to learn firsthand from the experts, whether that's providers in the community or SJPD officials and officers. I went on a ride-along early on. We try to ask all those questions. I spent an hour plus with the domestic violence folks. I spent an hour in DA Rosen's office just talking about officer-involved shootings. I think that is such an important part of what we have to be doing, especially given that we have limited access to information. We have to be asking as many people all the questions. We didn't take the time to do that on this set of issues because we saw this as preliminary and opening up sort of points of discussion. And I fully intended to delve into that at some later point. I should have made that very clear because it would be totally inconsistent with my MO if I wouldn't plan to do that. And I either should have made that clear or not put this in until I had done that. So I absolutely accept that.
Okay.
But I
Thank you.
want to be very clear that that is my MO and it's something I value greatly. And to the extent there was feelings of mischaracterization or misleading, that was absolutely not my intent.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councilmember Prowse?
Is it possible to, I know this isn't an online document at the moment and we're approving it here, and thank you for raising that and thank you for sort of owning up to that, Aaron. Is it possible to get that amended or footnoted or some sort of addition to reference what it is that you've just stated in regards to some of that data or even get the numbers changed?
Right. So, what I just said is now in the record. I am very disinclined to modify the report. I guarantee you, council member, there are other inaccuracies in this report. We cannot be perfect. We can't get it right. Now, the numbers here are accurate. We do provide the scope of the data. We provide the overall number, 629. And when you do the percentages from 629, you get to the raw numbers. And we do not state any conclusions about this what this data shows. We call it preliminary. We are just reporting what's available on the dashboard. We are not saying this means there's a problem. We're saying, look, these are initial red flags. Let's explore this more. We are putting up a website right now that will not contain the full content of the report. We're going to be excising we're going to be excerpting different parts of the report. And I think I'd have an awful lot of people on my case if this made its way into that version. So in terms of that report, which I am guessing more people are going to access that version than this version, that will clean up some of this stuff, as well as other things that we revisit with the benefit of more time and context.
Is there a reason why either Rick legally or Aaron, is it because like it's gone to print or something? Is there a reason why we couldn't make a change like that?
It's not a legal reason. It's his report, and the council's option is either to accept the report or to accept the report with the notation that you don't accept the findings or the statistics set forth. I think you were looking at page 35 and the top of page 36. I mean, you could include that in the motion, but it's the IPA's report, and Aaron, it's his prerogative to decide what he wants to do with the report. But the council, either accept it, reject it, or note, the parts you don't want to accept.
Okay, so we don't, I guess, have an opportunity to amend it? No.
No.
Okay. I think certainly, I don't know, that's worthy of thinking of for the future, and instances like this that I think, as the mayor pointed out, could infer some rather drastic, conclusions to people that just read over the report and look at some of that data and then draw a conclusion. And certainly we know where headlines go as well. They don't dive deep into it. And I guess it does put us at a little bit of a disadvantage if we maybe can draw a conclusion here on the dais, and if Aaron can come to a conclusion as well with us as we discuss this that says, yeah, maybe there's a better way we could have done that and understand the seriousness of it. But yet then there's no way to go back and edit that in the report. I would, I guess, stress on this issue, if they haven't gone to print, if it's a matter of making an adjustment, I'm going to guess, Aaron, there's been some adjustments this week on this. And you're right, I found some spelling errors, other things in there, right? Nothing that warranted me saying, let's
And
go
he's
back
a math major, and he found spelling errors.
Yeah, exactly.
So did I.
Yeah, nothing warranting, hey, let's go back and make an edit. But I do think the mayor makes a point on this, and the chief responded to it, and now hearing your response as well, in my mind I'm thinking, all right, if this is one that we can address in a change, why not? And before we go out and printing a lot of these, and if you're saying, Rick, all we can do is say, look, we accept it, but we don't accept this portion, this data. Aaron's going to change it on his online, sort of version of it.
Well, you can add on that that you recommend that modifications be made. My point is, it's the independent police auditor's report, and so it's his prerogative. Council's prerogative is don't accept that part of the report and suggest that modifications be made. But that's...
I'd love to suggest those modifications, so I'd like to ask that of our maker of the motion. Then, Aaron, I'd like to hear why, maybe what other reason as to why not.
Yeah, could I also just offer one other alternative too?
Sure.
You could also suggest that we defer approval until whatever changes are made, and we can choose to approve or not at that time. So just throw that as an option.
So I would just say this. So a couple things. First, we are not printing up a bunch of copies of this. The whole idea was to go online with the report. I was hoping to have a website up in time for the report. That didn't end up happening. We did not provide you with hard copies this year. That was deliberate. I printed up my own copy today. It has been finalized at the printer. It's up on our website in PDF form. There are other things that various council members will not agree about in this report. Recommendations we make, characterizations, and so on. My understanding is that the task for tonight is to accept the report, that this is reflective of my intentions as the IPA. I hope that there's a trust that I did not purposely mischaracterize or mislead. I can commit absolutely, as I said, regarding the website once it's up, and frankly, going forward in future reports. This is a good lesson learned for a new IPA, and I commit to that. I would worry about, honestly, and I say this as someone who has sat on a city commission, has been involved in issuing various public reports, and can guarantee you there will be flaws and omissions and inaccuracies in every single one of those. I think it sets a bad precedent because the chief had a number of criticisms. This was one of them. and I accept that criticism. And frankly, there are other criticisms I'm interested in sitting down with him to explore further. But I think it would set a bad precedent that we're going to walk through each of the criticisms. There's going to be some determination of, is this criticism more important than another criticism? This is my report. I stand by these statistics because they're right from the dashboard. I drew no conclusions based on them. And I am committing to exploring that data further and treating the data more sensitively, more carefully going forward. I hope that's sufficient, and I hope you'll accept the full report. Not approve it, accept it.
Did you have something you wanted to say, Chief? I just saw you raising your hand. I didn't know if that was about, or if you were waving to somebody, just saying hi, that's fine too.
I was just saying hi.
Okay, just saying hi. No worries, Chief. So, no, I'm not forcing you to speak if you don't want to.
Well, you're not, trust me, you're not forcing me to speak here. But I need to speak for the rank and file. Either this process is going to be deemed credible by my men and women or it isn't. And so I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so then I'll respond to Aaron. Aaron, I'm not hearing compelling enough reason as to why not. I'm also not hearing an argument from my colleagues on anything else that sort of raises the concern of, hey, maybe we should look at editing that. Nor am I saying, the chief, some other disparities that he may have in here warrant us going back and making some edits. That we need to go back and nitpick every single little thing. And I honestly, and it came up obviously just in the conversation here, and then in hearing your response to it. And then myself rereading these 3 bullet points, there's a lot in this report. There's quite a lot that we did today as a council. so maybe forgive me for not necessarily reading it in that context until the mayor pointed it out and you answered the way you did, to say, maybe we should address this before, right? The general public reads it in a way that I think they draw conclusions that I don't want them to draw. I'm also not hearing, again, that the council's interested in sort of nitpicking every single item, and I'm only suggesting this one. So I'll go back to the ask that I made to the maker of the motion. I know the mayor made a suggestion that we defer. I don't know, Mayor, what the difference is. Maybe you can explain to me.
Yeah, just, if there was some inclination in the independent police auditor to revise what I think he acknowledged would be somewhat misleading information, then we could defer this and have it come back on the consent agenda and simply approve it at that time.
Could we not do that just in the motion now if we made that direction?
He can certainly accept any friendly amendment of any sort, I would imagine, that Rick says is okay.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask that the maker of the motion to accept an amendment, or you can make a substantive motion.
Okay, so I guess I'm not seeing the major difference just in deferring it and accepting it with the changes. I'm okay either way. I'm asking for the amendment here. If you understand what it is, obviously, right, what the amendment is in regards to this one particular section on page 35, that the data be changed, and maybe we go to referencing real data, or we go to denoting that differently or explaining it rather than the percentages that were used, as Aaron acknowledged. And then I can accept the full report. So that would be the...
Well, the sense I get is that it's not that the data was inaccurate, it's just the way it was presented.
Yes.
Right?
So it'd be presenting it not in a percentage.
If you're asking me for a response?
Yeah, I guess just...
Yeah, I think the IPA is acknowledged, and I believe used the term misleading to describe it. And when you're dealing with data that is this small a number in the denominator, it's subject to wild swings with any one incident. And so my concern, just to be blunt, is this is what gets quoted in the newspaper. This is what litigants use, quoting official city documents when they're involved in litigation against us. The impact of a printed report from a top official in the city of San Jose is significant. And it's not something just to be blushed over. Well, there's going to be errors in every report. It's about race and it's about cops. It's going to get cited a lot. So I'm very concerned about this information being in there, and a somewhat cavalier attitude about it just being okay, I'll get it right next year.
So I'm absolutely not cavalier about it. I think I've been clear that I fully accept the criticism, and I absolutely could have handled these figures differently. As you know, some of this data did make its way into media reports, and you know, I think this hearing, this session, certainly the fact that the chief has an opportunity to flag these issues, that you have the opportunity to flag these issues, both here and in the media, as was done. I think that's been important to highlight concerns around the use of the data from the dashboard or from any other source. I have no problem modifying the way we present this, contextualizing it differently in the online version. I'm certainly not averse, given that we haven't printed up, spent the money to print up a lot of copies of this. I'm not averse to changing it. This has been up on the website. People have accessed it. And so we can make changes. I think it's important to retain something in here that explains what type of information is and is not available from the dashboard. And so I'm certainly not comfortable with taking out all of this data, but I agree with you, Mayor, that...
Yeah, let me be really clear. I never asked you to take data out. What I asked you was to insert raw data,
and that's what I'm
which
saying.
is far more accurate and far less misleading.
And that's what I think would be doable, would not have lots of implications for reformatting and the like, which costs, you know, a significant sum to send it for formatting.
And so I guess the other thing I was going to ask is if I accept the amendment to defer this, I assume that when it gets resubmitted for approval, it can then either contain some of those changes or not. I assume, right? I mean, or
yeah, I mean, I think the idea would be defer and give the auditor a chance to, if he's talking or suggesting making revisions, to make revisions and bring it back and let the council take it.
And I'd be okay with that, quite frankly, because I didn't look. I need to review exactly what the mayor's talking about and what's sort of spiked his concern. To better sort of get a grasp as to what the concerns are, so that way when it comes back we can have a better discussion about this. So I'm totally open to that. So I'll accept the amendment and we can bring it back and have a longer discussion.
Okay. The seconder, just trying to check. Okay.
I think that was me.
Okay.
Yeah, I will accept the amendment. I think I just want to say though, I hear what the mayor is saying, and I hear what our IPA is saying. I do sympathize with his position about precedent, and I, you know, to the mayor's point, the blurb that we're talking about is already in the press. I mean, I was reading something, I think, on the Metro about it, San José Inside. They already cited to it. To the extent that, you know, there are holes to be poked in that data set or the way it was presented, like the last 15 minutes of this council meeting is like exhibit A for whatever future, you know, litigation that might come before the city. And any case in chief cannot be, I don't think, would be set on like statistics, because statistics, there's that book, Lies, Damn Lies and Statistics. So anybody can push that back and forth. But I you know, given what's been said, I will support the amendment. But I do hear you. The way our government is, you know, it's a bit weird because it's not like exactly three branches, but the independence of the auditor and not coming before council and being micromanaged, I just do want to speak up for that rationale. So, but yes, I will accept the amendment. Thanks.
Okay, any comments or questions? Okay, then the motion is to ask the report to come back some period of time, a couple weeks, for us to consider accepting at that time. Is that right? Okay, and it's to both reports.
And if I can be clear, we also have the Department Initiated Investigations report. You want to accept that?
Yes. Okay, we're accepting one, we're referring the other. Okay. On the motion, then, let's vote. All right, I believe that's the last item. We have 2 cards from members of the community to speak on open forum. I have, I believe, Lilia Garrido and Blair Beekman.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this meeting tonight. About mental health issues in general, overall, it's a very subtle topic at this time, and you guys have started a process of subtlety in how to talk about this issue. I hope you can continue it, and I'm very sorry for what's just happened. It's a difficult situation, and I'm for the not the authority of the IPA, but a philosophy that I feel is important. And I'm sorry you can't figure out the number system yet. And good luck to that process. There was 6 items on the consent calendar today. To be approved committee minutes that were around the issues of December 2017. And I just wanted to reemphasize that what those were approving today was kind of how we're moving forward with kind of hopefully a positive philosophy for this department, or for not this department, for the whole city, about how to talk about to avoid law and order issues so much, so to be so strict with that in the future of 2018. And I just wanted to remind that I hope you can take down your secretive police practices and learn to practice a bit more openness and what's available. And you're all making efforts with the surveillance and technology ordinance that you've agreed to. Thank you incredibly for that. And good luck with the positive effort that I hear you're trying to make. Thank you.
Thank you. The meeting's adjourned.